The galaxy once knew an empire that stretched across the stars like a web of crystalline perfection, where beings of impossible grace and intellect ruled over worlds shaped by thought alone. The ancient Eldari Empire represented the pinnacle of psychic evolution, a civilization so advanced that reality itself bent to accommodate their desires. Their cities floated in impossible geometries, their technology merged seamlessly with organic growth, and their lifespans stretched across millennia that lesser races could barely comprehend. Yet within this perfection lay the seeds of the most catastrophic fall in galactic history. The Eldari had transcended the basic struggles of survival that plagued younger races. Disease, hunger, and natural death had become distant memories, conquered by their mastery over both the material and immaterial realms. With these fundamental challenges eliminated, the Eldari turned inward, seeking ever more refined forms of experience and sensation. What began as artistic expression and intellectual pursuit gradually transformed into something far more sinister. The pursuit of perfection became an obsession with extremes, and the exploration of sensation evolved into a hunger for experiences that pushed beyond the boundaries of what any sane mind should endure. Across their sprawling empire, the Eldari constructed pleasure cults dedicated to exploring every conceivable form of physical and emotional experience. These were not mere hedonistic gatherings, but elaborate ritualistic societies that treated the pursuit of sensation as a sacred art form. Members would spend decades perfecting techniques to heighten their sensitivity to pain and pleasure alike, developing methods to experience emotions with an intensity that would shatter lesser minds. The cults grew in influence and sophistication, drawing in even the most respected members of Eldari society with promises of transcendent experiences. The psychic nature of the Eldari meant that their collective obsessions did not remain confined to the material realm. Every act of cruelty, every moment of exquisite agony, every surge of dark pleasure sent ripples through the warp itself. The immaterial realm began to coalesce around these emanations, forming patterns and currents that grew stronger with each passing century. The Eldari, in their arrogance, dismissed these phenomena as merely interesting side effects of their pursuits, failing to recognize that they were feeding something vast and terrible in the depths of the warp. The pleasure cults evolved into something resembling religious movements, complete with elaborate hierarchies and increasingly extreme initiation rites. Torture became an art form, with practitioners developing techniques that could keep subjects conscious and aware through experiences that would normally result in death or madness. The infliction of suffering was elevated to a science, with cult masters studying the precise application of pain to achieve specific psychological and spiritual effects. These practices were not confined to willing participants. As the empire's moral boundaries dissolved, the cults began to prey upon those who attempted to resist their influence. The Eldari's mastery of the Webway allowed their corrupt practices to spread rapidly across their empire. What might have remained isolated incidents of depravity became coordinated campaigns of cruelty that spanned entire star systems. Slave raids became commonplace, with Eldari fleets descending upon primitive worlds to harvest populations for their increasingly elaborate ceremonies. The screams of billions echoed through the warp, adding their voices to the growing chorus that fed the nascent entity stirring in the immaterial realm. As the Empire's decadence reached its zenith, the barriers between the material and immaterial realms began to weaken. Demons, drawn by the psychic emanations of the Eldari's excesses, began to manifest more frequently in real space. Rather than viewing these incursions as warnings, the pleasure cults welcomed them as new sources of exotic experience. They began to actively court demonic attention, believing that entities from the warp could provide sensations beyond anything the material realm could offer. The birth of Slaanesh came not as a sudden explosion, but as a gradual awakening that built to a crescendo of unimaginable horror. The Prince of Pleasure had been gestating in the warp for millennia, fed by the collective psychic emanations of the Eldari Empire's descent into depravity. When the entity finally achieved full consciousness, the psychic shockwave tore through reality itself, creating the massive warp storm that would become known as the Eye of Terror. The fall of the Eldari was not merely the collapse of a civilization, but the near extinction of an entire species. Slaanesh's birth cry consumed the souls of trillions of Eldari across the galaxy, drawing them into the newly formed Chaos God's essence to fuel its first moments of existence. Entire worlds simply ceased to exist as the boundary between real space and the warp collapsed, swallowing star systems whole. The psychic death scream of the dying empire created ripples that disrupted warp travel across the galaxy, bringing the Great Crusade of the Imperium to a temporary halt and ushering in the Age of Strife. Those Eldari who survived the initial catastrophe found themselves forever marked by their species' collective guilt. Slaanesh's birth had created a fundamental connection between the Chaos God and every member of the Eldari race, a spiritual wound that would never heal. The Prince of Pleasure held a claim upon their souls that transcended death itself, ensuring that any Eldari who died without protection would be drawn into Slaanesh's realm to experience eternal torment. The survivors faced an impossible choice: accept the slow spiritual death that awaited them or find ways to cheat their fate. The responses to this crisis would define the future of the Eldari race and split them into distinct factions, each pursuing their own path to survival. Some embraced rigid discipline and emotional suppression, believing that by controlling their impulses, they could avoid feeding Slaanesh's hunger. Others sought to preserve their souls through the creation of artificial repositories, trading their natural psychic abilities for the hope of avoiding eternal damnation. The ancestors of the Drukhari chose a different path entirely. Rather than flee from their dark heritage or attempt to suppress it, they embraced the very impulses that had led to their species' downfall. These Eldari had been among the most devoted followers of the pleasure cults, the architects of the Empire's descent into depravity. They had not merely participated in the excesses that birthed Slaanesh, but had actively cultivated and refined them, treating cruelty as both art and science. When the fall came, these dark Eldari retreated deep into the Webway, seeking sanctuary in the ancient network of tunnels that connected the galaxy's worlds. The Webway offered protection from the psychic storms that raged across real space, but more importantly, it provided a realm where they could continue their practices without interference from the emerging Eldari factions who sought to distance themselves from their species' dark past. The Webway itself became their new empire, a twisted reflection of the realm their ancestors had once ruled. They carved out vast territories within the interdimensional tunnels, establishing cities that defied conventional physics and geography. These settlements grew organically around the pursuit of sensation and suffering, with every structure designed to facilitate the infliction of pain and the extraction of psychic energy from their victims. Unlike their cousins who would later adopt the path system, the Proto-Drukhari rejected any attempt to limit or control their impulses. They viewed the rigid discipline embraced by other Eldari survivors as a form of spiritual suicide, a denial of their species' true nature. The paths represented everything they despised about the post-fall Eldari mentality: the acceptance of limitation, the fear of their own potential, and the willingness to live diminished lives in exchange for safety. The Drukhari's rejection of the path system was not merely philosophical but practical. They had discovered that the very acts their cousins sought to avoid actually provided a form of protection against Slaanesh's hunger. The infliction of suffering upon others created a psychic feedback that could temporarily sate the Chaos God's claim upon their souls. This was not true freedom from their curse, but rather a form of spiritual maintenance that required constant renewal. The biological and spiritual mechanics of this curse became the defining characteristic of Drukhari existence. Each member of their race carried within them a spiritual wound that slowly drained their life force, drawing it inexorably towards Slaanesh's realm. This process manifested as a gradual aging and weakening that would eventually culminate in death and damnation. The only way to halt this decline was to feed upon the suffering of others, absorbing the psychic energy released by pain and terror to replenish their own dwindling reserves. This need for suffering became more than mere sustenance. It evolved into the cornerstone of Drukhari society. The ability to inflict pain effectively determined one's status within their communities, with the most skilled torturers rising to positions of power and influence. The Drukhari developed elaborate techniques for extracting maximum psychic energy from their victims, learning to prolong suffering for days or even weeks to maximize the spiritual nourishment they could derive from each captive. The curse also created a fundamental contradiction within Drukhari nature. While they required the suffering of others to survive, they remained vulnerable to the same spiritual drain that affected all Eldari. This meant that even as they fed upon their victims, they were simultaneously being consumed by the very entity their ancestors had created. The result was a species locked in a perpetual cycle of predation and consumption, forever seeking new sources of suffering to fuel their continued existence. The Drukhari's embrace of their dark nature extended beyond mere survival needs. They cultivated cruelty as an art form, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of inflicting pain and extracting psychic energy. Their cities became laboratories for the study of suffering, with entire districts dedicated to the refinement of torture techniques and the development of new methods for prolonging agony. The knowledge accumulated over millennia of such practices made them perhaps the most skilled practitioners of cruelty in the galaxy. This expertise in inflicting suffering became their primary advantage in the post-Fall galaxy. While other Eldari factions struggled with their diminished numbers and limited resources, the Drukhari found that their skills made them valuable as mercenaries and raiders. They could offer services that no other faction could match, providing levels of cruelty and precision that satisfied even the most demanding clients. This economic advantage allowed them to maintain their independence and continue their practices without interference from other powers. The spiritual curse that bound the Drukhari to their lifestyle of predation also shaped their relationship with death itself. Unlike other races, the Drukhari could not simply accept death as a natural conclusion to existence. Every death represented a victory for Slaanesh, another soul claimed by the Prince of Pleasure. This knowledge created a desperate urgency within Drukhari society, driving them to ever greater extremes in their pursuit of the suffering needed to sustain their lives. The transformation of the Drukhari from scattered survivors into a unified force of predators required more than just shared philosophy and mutual desperation. It demanded a stronghold that could serve as both sanctuary and staging ground for their raids across the galaxy. Deep within the Webway's labyrinthine passages, the Dark Eldari began construction of what would become the most twisted metropolis in existence, Commorragh, the Dark City. The location chosen for this endeavor was no random selection, but a carefully calculated decision based on both strategic and mystical considerations. The Drukhari identified a massive nexus point within the Webway where dozens of tunnels converged, creating a natural hub for interdimensional travel. This convergence point existed within a pocket dimension that had been artificially expanded by the ancient Eldari Empire, originally serving as a way station for their vast fleets. The space itself defied conventional physics, existing in a state of controlled dimensional flux that allowed for expansion and modification on a scale that would be impossible in normal space. The construction of Commorragh began as a purely practical endeavor, with the Drukhari establishing basic settlements around the most stable dimensional anchor points. However, as their numbers grew and their understanding of the pocket dimension's properties deepened, the city evolved into something far more ambitious. The Drukhari discovered that the dimensional barriers within their chosen realm were remarkably malleable, allowing them to reshape space itself according to their needs and desires. The architecture that emerged from these early experiments reflected the Drukhari's fundamental rejection of conventional limitations. Spires rose from the city's foundations in impossible spirals, their surfaces covered in razor-sharp protrusions that served both decorative and defensive purposes. These towers stretched upward for kilometers, their upper reaches disappearing into the perpetual twilight that shrouded the city's sky. The spires were not merely tall, but existed in a state of dimensional distortion that made their true height impossible to measure by conventional means. Between these towering structures, the Drukhari constructed floating districts that drifted through the city's airspace in carefully choreographed patterns. These aerial neighborhoods were suspended by a combination of advanced gravitic technology and dimensional manipulation, creating residential and commercial areas that existed in three-dimensional space without any connection to the ground below. The floating districts rotated slowly around the central spires, their movements creating an ever-changing cityscape that prevented enemies from developing reliable maps of the city's layout. The gravitational fields within Commorragh were subject to the whims of its architects, creating zones where the normal rules of physics simply did not apply. Walkways extended horizontally from building faces, allowing pedestrians to stroll along surfaces that would be walls in normal space. Gardens hung suspended in mid-air, their plants growing in impossible directions as they responded to localized gravitational anomalies. Water flowed upward in some districts, creating fountains that defied logic while serving as both art installations and practical water distribution systems. The city's expansion followed no coherent urban planning, but instead grew organically around the needs and desires of its inhabitants. New districts were added whenever the Drukhari conquered additional pocket dimensions or discovered new nexus points within the Webway. These additions were not simply attached to the existing city, but were integrated through dimensional folding techniques that allowed vast spaces to exist within seemingly small areas. A single building might contain entire neighborhoods within its walls, with corridors that led to districts that appeared to be kilometers away when viewed from the outside. The materials used in Commorragh's construction reflected the Drukhari's access to resources from across the galaxy. Walls were constructed from crystallized pain, a substance created by subjecting certain minerals to prolonged exposure to psychic agony. The crystals glowed with a faint, sickly light that provided illumination, while serving as a constant reminder of the suffering that powered the city. Metal components were forged from alloys that incorporated the screams of tortured slaves, creating structures that literally resonated with the echoes of pain. The city's districts were organized around different aspects of Drukhari society, with each area serving specific functions within their culture of cruelty. The Nexus of Shadows served as the primary governmental district, housing the courts and meeting places where the various cabals conducted their political machinations. The architecture here was deliberately imposing, with massive halls designed to dwarf visitors and emphasize the power of those who ruled from within. The floors were constructed from polished bone, creating surfaces that reflected the twisted light of the pain crystals, while providing an appropriately macabre foundation for the city's power structure. The sprawls represented the city's primary residential areas, though the term residential carried different connotations in Drukhari society than it would for other races. These districts were designed around the concept of competitive cruelty, with each dwelling serving as both home and torture chamber. The buildings were constructed with multiple levels of hidden chambers and secret passages, allowing residents to conduct their dark practices without interference from neighbors or rivals. The sprawls were connected by a network of elevated walkways that allowed for rapid movement between buildings, while providing excellent vantage points for observing the activities of potential enemies or victims. The Port of Lost Souls served as Commorragh's primary gateway to the broader Webway network, handling the constant flow of raiding fleets that departed to terrorize the galaxy and returned with fresh captives. The port facilities were designed to accommodate vessels of various sizes, from small raiding craft to massive slave barges capable of holding thousands of prisoners. The docking bays were equipped with specialized containment systems designed to prevent escape attempts while maximizing the psychological impact on newly arrived captives. The architecture incorporated elements specifically designed to disorient and terrify, with walls that seemed to shift and move when viewed peripherally, and floors that transmitted the sounds of distant screaming. The slave markets of Commorragh represented perhaps the most economically important aspect of the city's function. These vast commercial districts were designed to facilitate the trade in sentient beings, with specialized facilities for different types of merchandise. The markets were organized around the concept of maximum display, with holding pens arranged in tiers that allowed potential buyers to observe their purchases from multiple angles. The architecture incorporated elements designed to enhance the despair of the captives, while providing comfortable viewing areas for customers. The fighting pits scattered throughout the city served multiple purposes within Drukhari society, functioning as entertainment venues, training facilities, and ritualistic spaces for the resolution of disputes. These arenas were constructed with retractable floor sections that could be reconfigured to create different combat environments, from simple dueling circles to elaborate maze-like structures designed to prolong conflicts. The seating areas were arranged in steep tiers that brought spectators close to the action, while providing clear sight lines for the appreciation of combat techniques and the enjoyment of suffering. The pleasure districts of Commorragh represented the ultimate expression of the city's dedication to sensation and excess. These areas were designed around the concept of total sensory immersion, with buildings that incorporated advanced technology to manipulate the perceptions of visitors. The architecture itself was designed to be psychologically affecting, with corridors that seemed to stretch infinitely and rooms that appeared larger or smaller than their actual dimensions. The pleasure districts were populated by establishments that catered to every conceivable desire, staffed by beings who had been modified through a combination of surgical techniques and alchemical treatments to enhance their ability to provide unique experiences. The homunculi covens maintained their own specialized districts within the city, areas dedicated to the pursuit of flesh crafting and the exploration of biological modification. These districts were characterized by their organic architecture, with buildings that appeared to have been grown rather than constructed. The walls pulsed with a rhythm reminiscent of a heartbeat, and the floors were covered with a substance that felt disturbingly similar to living tissue. The laboratories and workshops within these districts were equipped with advanced surgical equipment and contained specimens representing every known form of life in the galaxy. The city's infrastructure was designed to support its inhabitants' unique needs while serving as a constant reminder of their nature. The water distribution system carried not just water, but also various chemical compounds designed to enhance the sensitivity of the Drukhari to pain and pleasure. The atmospheric processors maintained an environment that was technically breathable, but carried subtle toxins that would be lethal to most other species, while providing the Drukhari with a mild euphoric effect. The transportation network within Commorragh reflected the city's three-dimensional nature, with transit systems that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Gravitic lifts carried passengers between the various floating districts, while high-speed transport tubes connected distant areas of the city through dimensional shortcuts. The vehicles used within the city were designed to be both functional and intimidating, with sleek lines that suggested predatory animals and surfaces that incorporated the same pain crystals used in the city's construction. The city's defensive systems were integrated into its very structure, with weapon emplacements that could emerge from seemingly decorative elements at a moment's notice. The dimensional nature of the city allowed for defensive strategies that would be impossible in normal space, with entire districts capable of phase shifting out of reality to avoid attack. The Webway gates that provided access to the city were heavily fortified and could be sealed at the first sign of threat, trapping any invaders within the city's twisted geography. The expansion of Commorragh beyond its original boundaries occurred through the conquest and integration of other pocket dimensions within the Webway. The Drukhari discovered that many of the ancient Eldari way station had been abandoned during the fall, leaving behind empty dimensional spaces that could be claimed and modified. These satellite realms were connected to the main city through a network of dimensional bridges that allowed for rapid transit while maintaining the security of the central hub. Some of these satellite dimensions were converted into specialized facilities that served specific functions within the broader Drukhari economy. Manufacturing centers produced the weapons and equipment needed for raiding operations, while research facilities conducted experiments that would be impossible within the main city due to their dangerous nature. Agricultural dimensions provided food and other biological resources, though the term agriculture had a distinctly sinister meaning when applied to Drukhari practices. The conquered pocket dimensions also served as prisons for particularly valuable or dangerous captives, with entire realms dedicated to the containment and processing of slaves. These prison dimensions were designed to be inescapable, with environmental conditions that could be adjusted to maximize the suffering of their inhabitants. The architecture of these spaces was deliberately disorienting, with non-Euclidean geometries that made navigation impossible for those unfamiliar with their layouts. The temporal flow within Commorragh and its satellite realms was subject to manipulation by the city's rulers, creating zones where time moved at different rates. This temporal distortion allowed the Drukhari to conduct activities that required extended periods while maintaining synchronization with the outside galaxy. Torture sessions could be extended for subjective years, while only hours passed in real time, allowing for the extraction of maximum psychic energy from victims without interfering with other operations. The perpetual twilight that shrouded the city was not a natural phenomenon, but a carefully maintained atmospheric condition that served both practical and psychological purposes. The dim light provided enough illumination for the Drukhari's enhanced vision, while creating an environment that was psychologically oppressive to most other species. The twilight was maintained through a combination of artificial light sources and dimensional manipulation that filtered the energy from distant stars. Within the twisted spires and floating districts of Commorragh, power flows through carefully structured hierarchies known as cabals. These organizations represent far more than simple military units or political parties. They are the fundamental building blocks of Drukhari civilization, complex webs of loyalty, ambition, and calculated betrayal that have evolved over 10 millennia of constant warfare and intrigue. Each cabal functions as a self-contained ecosystem of violence, with its own territories within the Dark City, its own fleets of raiding vessels, and its own carefully maintained networks of allies and enemies. The cabal system emerged from the practical necessities of Drukhari survival in the aftermath of the fall. The scattered survivors who had retreated into the Webway quickly discovered that individual predators, no matter how skilled, could not hope to compete with the organized forces that dominated the post-fall galaxy. The Imperium's vast military machine, the Orc-Waags that swept across entire sectors, and the emerging Chaos warbands all possessed numerical advantages that made them dangerous opponents for lone raiders. The Drukhari response was characteristically pragmatic. They organized themselves into hunting packs that could coordinate their efforts while maintaining the flexibility needed for their preferred style of warfare. The earliest cabals were little more than loose confederations of raiders who shared common hunting grounds and agreed to avoid interfering with each other's operations. These primitive organizations were held together by mutual benefit rather than formal structure, with members free to leave or join other groups as circumstances dictated. However, as Commorragh grew and the competition for resources intensified, these informal arrangements evolved into more sophisticated hierarchies with clearly defined ranks, territories, and codes of conduct. The transformation from simple raiding bands to complex political entities occurred gradually over several millennia, driven by the constant pressure of competition between different groups. Cabals that maintained loose organizational structures found themselves outmaneuvered by those that developed more rigid command hierarchies and clearer chains of authority. The ability to coordinate large-scale operations became increasingly important as the Drukhari expanded their raiding activities beyond simple slave-gathering expeditions to include complex military campaigns that required precise timing and coordination between multiple strike forces. The modern cabal represents the culmination of this evolutionary process, a sophisticated organization that combines military efficiency with political flexibility. Each cabal maintains its own distinct identity, reflected in everything from the color schemes of their armor to the specific torture techniques favored by their members. These differences are not merely cosmetic, but represent fundamental philosophical divisions about the best methods for extracting psychic energy from victims and the most effective strategies for conducting raids against different types of targets. The internal structure of a typical cabal follows a strict hierarchical model that has been refined over millennia of practical experience. At the apex of this hierarchy stands the Archon, an individual who has successfully navigated the treacherous waters of Drukhari politics to achieve supreme authority within their organization. The path to becoming an Archon is never straightforward, requiring a combination of martial prowess, political cunning, and sheer ruthlessness that few Drukhari possess in sufficient measure. Archons are not elected or appointed through any formal process, but instead achieve their positions through a combination of conquest, manipulation, and survival. The most common path to power involves serving as a Draken within an existing cabal, gradually accumulating influence and resources until an opportunity arises to challenge the current leadership. These challenges rarely take the form of direct confrontation, as such crude methods are considered beneath the dignity of sophisticated Drukhari nobles. Instead, aspiring Archons employ elaborate schemes that may take decades or even centuries to reach fruition. The typical Archon's rise to power involves the careful cultivation of allies within the cabal's hierarchy, the strategic elimination of rivals through assassination or political maneuvering, and the accumulation of military victories that demonstrate their worthiness to lead. The process is complicated by the fact that other ambitious Drukhari are simultaneously pursuing their own schemes, creating a complex web of competing interests that requires constant vigilance and adaptation to navigate successfully. Once an Archon achieves power, maintaining their position requires even greater skill than obtaining it originally demanded. The same ambition and ruthlessness that elevated them to leadership ensures that they face constant challenges from subordinates who seek to claim their position. The Archon must balance the need to project strength and authority with the practical requirements of maintaining the loyalty of their followers, a task complicated by the fact that fear and respect are often indistinguishable in Drukhari society. The court of an Archon represents a microcosm of Drukhari society, with layers of nobles, advisors, and functionaries arranged in a complex hierarchy that reflects both practical necessity and social status. The most important positions within this court are held by Drakens, high-ranking nobles who serve as the Archon's primary lieutenants and potential successors. The relationship between an Archon and their Drakens is characterized by a delicate balance of trust and suspicion, with both parties aware that today's loyal subordinate may become tomorrow's usurper. Drakens typically command significant military forces within the cabal and are responsible for specific aspects of the organization's operations. Some Drakens specialize in particular types of raids, developing expertise in attacking Imperial Hive cities or Orc settlements, while others focus on internal security or the management of the cabal's slave trading operations. The division of responsibilities among Drakens serves both practical and political purposes, preventing any single individual from accumulating too much power while ensuring that the cabal's various activities receive proper attention. Below the Drakens in the hierarchy are the Sybarites, mid-ranking nobles who serve as squad leaders and minor commanders within the cabal's military structure. Sybarites represent the backbone of Drukhari military organization, providing the tactical leadership needed to coordinate small unit operations while serving as a bridge between the cabal's elite leadership and its rank and file warriors. The position of Sybarite is often the first step on the path to higher rank, and competition for these positions is correspondingly fierce. The rank and file warriors of a cabal, known simply as Cabalite warriors, form the bulk of the organization's military strength. These individuals have proven their worth through participation in successful raids and have demonstrated the combination of skill, cunning, and cruelty that defines Drukhari military culture. Despite their relatively low position within the hierarchy, Cabalite warriors are far from powerless, as their collective loyalty or disloyalty can determine the fate of their superiors. The Cabal of the Black Heart stands as the most powerful and influential organization within Commorragh, a position achieved through 10 millennia of successful expansion and political maneuvering. Founded in the early years after the fall by a group of survivors who had been among the most devoted followers of the ancient pleasure cults, the Black Heart has grown from a minor raiding band into a military and political force that rivals some of the lesser powers of the galaxy. The current Archon of the Black Heart, Asdrubal Vecht, represents perhaps the most successful practitioner of Drukhari political arts in the city's history. His rise to power began as a lowly slave within the Cabal's hierarchy, a position that would normally preclude any possibility of advancement within the rigid social structure of Drukhari society. However, Vect possessed a combination of intelligence, ambition, and utter ruthlessness that allowed him to exploit the weaknesses of his supposed superiors and gradually accumulate power through a series of carefully orchestrated schemes. Vect's transformation from slave to supreme ruler took place over several millennia and involved some of the most complex political maneuvering in Commorragh's history. His early schemes focused on playing different factions within the Cabal against each other, using his position as a seemingly powerless slave to gather intelligence and identify opportunities for manipulation. As his influence grew, he began to orchestrate the downfall of his former masters, using their own ambitions and prejudices against them in elaborate traps that eliminated potential rivals while advancing his own position. The Black Heart's military strength reflects its political dominance, with the Cabal maintaining one of the largest fleets in Commorragh and controlling some of the most profitable raiding routes in the galaxy. The organization's warriors are equipped with the finest weapons and armor available, and their training regimens are considered among the most rigorous in the Dark City. The Cabal's success in military operations has created a cycle of expansion that reinforces its political power, as successful raids bring in new resources and slaves that can be used to fund further expansion. The territorial holdings of the Black Heart within Commorragh reflect the Cabal's status and power, with the organization controlling some of the most desirable districts in the city. These territories include major slave markets, important manufacturing facilities, and strategic locations that provide access to key Webway routes. The architecture of Black Heart territory is characterized by its imposing scale and elaborate decorative elements, with buildings designed to project power and intimidate visitors. The Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue represents a different approach to Drukhari organization, focusing on stealth, subterfuge, and the use of exotic toxins rather than brute force. Founded by survivors who had specialized in the more subtle arts of cruelty during the height of the ancient Eldari Empire, the Poisoned Tongue has developed a reputation for operations that rely on cunning and precision rather than overwhelming firepower. The warriors of the Poisoned Tongue are masters of infiltration and assassination, capable of striking at targets that would be impossible for more conventional forces to reach. Their weapons are typically coated with toxins that have been developed through millennia of experimentation, creating effects that range from immediate death to prolonged agony that can last for days or weeks. The Cabal's alchemists are considered among the finest in Commorragh, with their laboratories producing substances that are highly sought after by other organizations. The leadership structure of the Poisoned Tongue reflects the organization's emphasis on subtlety and precision, with advancement typically based on demonstrated skill in covert operations rather than success in open combat. The Cabal's Archon maintains power through a network of spies and assassins that extends throughout Commorragh and beyond, providing intelligence that allows the organization to anticipate and counter the schemes of its rivals. The territorial holdings of the Poisoned Tongue are scattered throughout Commorragh rather than concentrated in a single district, reflecting the organization's preference for operating from hidden bases rather than obvious strongholds. These facilities are typically concealed within the structures of other organizations or hidden in the less traveled areas of the city, making them difficult for enemies to locate and attack. The Cabal of the Flayed Skull has built its reputation on sheer aggression and the pursuit of close combat, attracting warriors who prefer direct confrontation to the subtle schemes favored by other organizations. The Cabal's origins can be traced back to a group of survivors who had served as shock troops during the final days of the ancient Eldari Empire, and this military heritage continues to influence the organization's culture and tactics. The warriors of the Flayed Skull are renowned for their skill in close combat and their willingness to engage in direct confrontation with enemy forces. Their equipment emphasizes mobility and close-range firepower, with many warriors preferring to fight from fast-moving vehicles that allow them to close with their enemies quickly. The Cabal's raids are characterized by their speed and brutality, with strike forces appearing suddenly to overwhelm their targets before disappearing back into the Webway. The leadership of the Flayed Skull typically consists of individuals who have proven themselves through personal combat rather than political maneuvering, though the realities of Drukhari society ensure that even the most straightforward warriors must develop some skill in intrigue to survive. The Cabal's Archon maintains authority through a combination of martial prowess and the respect earned through successful military campaigns. The territorial holdings of the Flayed Skull include some of the most heavily fortified districts in Commorragh, with defensive installations that reflect the organization's military focus. These areas serve as training grounds for the Cabal's warriors and storage facilities for their extensive collections of weapons and vehicles. The architecture tends to be more functional than decorative, though it still incorporates the pain crystals and organic elements that characterize Drukhari construction. The relationships between different Cabals represent one of the most complex aspects of Drukhari society, with alliances and rivalries that shift constantly based on changing circumstances and opportunities. The political landscape of Commorragh is characterized by a state of perpetual low-level conflict, with different organizations constantly maneuvering for advantage while avoiding open warfare that might weaken all parties involved. Formal alliances between Cabals are rare and typically temporary, established to address specific threats or opportunities rather than long-term strategic partnerships. These agreements are usually sealed through elaborate ceremonies that involve the exchange of hostages, the sharing of intelligence, or the coordination of joint raiding operations. However, even the most formal alliances are subject to betrayal if circumstances change, or if one party perceives an opportunity to gain advantage over their supposed allies. The competition between Cabals extends beyond simple military rivalry to encompass economic warfare, political maneuvering, and cultural influence. Different organizations compete for control of the most profitable slave markets, the most strategic locations within the city, and the most talented individuals within Drukhari society. This competition creates a dynamic environment where innovation and adaptation are essential for survival, driving the development of new technologies, tactics, and organizational structures. The thunderous roar of 50,000 spectators reverberates through the crystalline walls of the Crucible arena as two figures circle each other on the blood-soaked sands below. Their movements flow with predatory grace, each step calculated to maintain perfect balance while seeking the microscopic opening that will determine victory or death. The taller figure spins a pair of Hydra gauntlets in lazy arcs, their monomolecular blades catching the arena's artificial lighting and casting rainbow patterns across the amphitheater's upper tiers. Her opponent crouches low, razor flails held in a defensive posture that speaks of decades spent perfecting the deadly art of close combat. Both warriors wear the ritual scars and subcutaneous armor implants that mark them as members of Commorragh's most dangerous organizations, the witch cults. These warrior athletes represent a fundamental aspect of Drukhari society that exists parallel to the political machinations of the Cabals, while serving an equally essential function within the Dark City's ecosystem of violence. Where the Cabals focus their energies on external raids and the acquisition of slaves, the witch cults turn their attention inward, providing the spectacular displays of martial prowess that feed the Drukhari's insatiable hunger for entertainment and their deep-seated need to witness suffering, elevated to an art form. The origins of the witch cults can be traced back to the gladiatorial traditions that flourished during the final centuries of the ancient Eldari Empire, when the pursuit of ever more extreme sensations led to the development of combat sports that pushed participants beyond the normal boundaries of pain and endurance. These early competitions were not mere entertainment, but served as ritualistic expressions of the Eldari's growing obsession with the exploration of physical and psychological limits. The gladiators who participated in these events were revered as artists whose medium was violence itself, practitioners of a discipline that required years of training to master and lifetimes to perfect. When the fall shattered the Eldari Empire and the survivors retreated into the Webway, the gladiatorial traditions were among the cultural practices that the proto-Drukhari brought with them into their new realm. However, the changed circumstances of their existence transformed these competitions from elaborate entertainments into matters of literal life and death. The psychic energy released by the suffering of combatants provided sustenance for spectators, while the skills developed through constant combat training proved essential for survival in the dangerous environment of the developing Dark City. The evolution from simple gladiatorial competitions to organized witch cults occurred gradually over the first millennia following the establishment of Commorragh. As the city grew and its social structures became more complex, the most successful gladiators began to attract followers who sought to learn their techniques and share in their glory. These informal schools gradually developed into formal organizations with their own territories, hierarchies, and codes of conduct that paralleled the development of the cabals, while maintaining their distinct focus on the perfection of combat skills. The modern witch cults represent the culmination of this evolutionary process, sophisticated organizations that combine the functions of military training academies, religious orders, and entertainment corporations. Each cult maintains its own distinct identity and specializes in particular aspects of combat, from the lightning-fast strikes favored by some groups to the elaborate acrobatic displays that characterize others. The diversity of fighting styles and philosophical approaches ensures that the arena competitions remain unpredictable and engaging for spectators, while providing multiple paths for aspiring warriors to develop their skills. The internal structure of a typical witch cult follows a meritocratic hierarchy based on demonstrated combat ability and the capacity to provide spectacular entertainment for audiences. At the foundation of this structure are the basic witches, warriors who have completed their initial training and proven themselves capable of surviving in the arena. These individuals represent the bulk of most cults' membership and serve as both combatants and training partners for more advanced members. The path from novice to experienced witch requires not only the development of combat skills, but also the cultivation of a personal fighting style that can capture the attention of audiences and distinguish the warrior from their peers. This process involves extensive experimentation with different weapons, fighting techniques, and performance elements, as success in the arena depends as much on spectacle as on martial prowess. The most successful witches develop signature moves or combinations that become associated with their individual identities, creating personal brands that can attract devoted followings among the arena's regular spectators. The transformation of the witch's body through surgical modification and alchemical enhancement represents a crucial aspect of their development as warriors and performers. The subcutaneous armor implants that protect vital organs while maintaining flexibility are just the beginning of a process that can continue throughout a warrior's career. Many witches undergo procedures to enhance their reflexes, increase their pain tolerance, or modify their appearance in ways that make them more visually striking in combat. These modifications are not merely cosmetic but serve practical purposes, providing advantages that can mean the difference between victory and death in the arena. The weapons favored by witch cults reflect their emphasis on speed, agility, and visual spectacle rather than raw destructive power. The Hydra gauntlets worn by many warriors consist of multiple retractable blades that can be extended or retracted at will, allowing for rapid combinations of strikes that create dazzling displays of martial skill. The razor flails preferred by other fighters incorporate flexible weapons that require exceptional timing and coordination to use effectively, but which can bypass conventional defenses when wielded by skilled practitioners. The Shardnet and Impaler represent perhaps the most iconic witch weapons, combining the functionality of gladiatorial equipment with the advanced materials science of the Drukhari. The Shardnet consists of a weighted net embedded with monomolecular filaments that can slice through armor and flesh with equal ease, while the Impaler serves as both a thrusting weapon and a tool for manipulating the net during combat. The combination requires extensive training to master, but allows skilled practitioners to control the flow of combat while inflicting precise wounds that maximize their opponent's suffering without immediately ending the fight. The Hecatrix represents the next level in the witch hierarchy, warriors who have distinguished themselves through exceptional performance in the arena and demonstrated the leadership qualities necessary to guide other fighters. These individuals typically command small groups of witches and are responsible for developing training regimens, coordinating performances, and maintaining the discipline necessary for survival in the competitive environment of the cults. The position of Hecatrix requires not only superior combat skills, but also the political acumen necessary to navigate the complex relationships between different factions within the cult. The role of the Hecatrix extends beyond simple military leadership to encompass the preservation and transmission of the cult's fighting traditions. These warriors serve as living repositories of combat knowledge, maintaining the techniques and philosophies that define their organization's identity. The teaching methods employed by Hecatrix often involve direct physical instruction, with students learning through repeated sparring sessions that gradually increase in intensity and complexity as their skills develop. The Bloodbrides represent the elite tier of witch cult warriors, individuals who have achieved such mastery of their craft that they serve as champions and exemplars for their entire organization. These warriors have typically survived hundreds of arena combats and have developed fighting styles that are both devastatingly effective and visually spectacular. The Bloodbrides often serve as the primary representatives of their cults in the most important arena events, competitions where the stakes extend beyond individual glory to encompass the reputation and status of their entire organization. The path to becoming a Bloodbride requires not only exceptional combat ability, but also the development of a personal philosophy that can inspire others and contribute to the cult's overall identity. These warriors often develop signature techniques or fighting styles that become associated with their names and are passed down to future generations of fighters. The most successful Bloodbrides achieve a form of immortality through their influence on the development of combat techniques and training methods that continue to be used long after their deaths. At the apex of each witch cult stands the succubus, a warrior who has achieved such mastery of combat that they transcend the normal boundaries of physical limitation and approach something resembling divine perfection in their chosen discipline. The succubus represents not only the pinnacle of martial achievement, but also serves as the spiritual and philosophical leader of their organization, responsible for maintaining the cult's traditions while adapting to changing circumstances and opportunities. The transformation from Bloodbride to succubus involves more than simply achieving superior combat skills, though such abilities are certainly prerequisite for the position. The succubus must demonstrate a deep understanding of the philosophical principles that underlie their cult's approach to combat, along with the political sophistication necessary to maintain their organization's position within the complex hierarchy of Commorragh's power structure. This combination of martial prowess, intellectual depth, and political acumen makes the position of succubus one of the most demanding leadership roles in Drukhari society. The Cult of Strife stands as perhaps the most prestigious and influential of the witch cults, an organization that has achieved dominance through a combination of superior training methods, innovative combat techniques, and shrewd political maneuvering. The cult's approach to combat emphasizes speed and precision over raw power, with warriors trained to strike with surgical accuracy at their opponent's most vulnerable points. This philosophy extends beyond mere fighting techniques to encompass a comprehensive worldview that treats combat as a form of artistic expression, requiring both technical skill and creative inspiration. The training facilities maintained by the Cult of Strife represent some of the most advanced combat instruction centers in Commorragh, with practice arenas that can simulate a wide variety of environmental conditions and combat scenarios. The cult's instructors employ teaching methods that have been refined over millennia of practical experience, combining traditional techniques with innovative approaches that push students to exceed their perceived limitations. The graduation ceremonies for new members involve ritual combats that serve both as final examinations and as public demonstrations of the cult's training effectiveness. The Cult of Strife's influence extends beyond the arena to encompass significant political power within Commorragh's governing structure. The cult's leaders maintain close relationships with several major cabals and have successfully positioned themselves as essential allies in various political schemes and military operations. This political involvement has provided the cult with resources and opportunities that would be unavailable to organizations focused solely on arena combat, allowing them to maintain their position as the premier witch cult in the Dark City. The warriors of the Cult of Strife are distinguished by their distinctive armor designs and weapon preferences, with many members favoring combinations of traditional witch weapons with exotic items obtained through the cult's extensive trading networks. The cult's armorers have developed specialized equipment that enhances the natural abilities of their warriors while maintaining the flexibility and mobility that are essential for their fighting style. The visual impact of Strife warriors in combat is carefully calculated to maximize the psychological effect on both opponents and spectators. The Cult of the Cursed Blade has built its reputation on the mastery of weapon techniques that other organizations consider too dangerous or unpredictable to employ effectively. The cult's warriors specialize in the use of weapons that incorporate random elements or require exceptional timing to use safely, creating combat styles that are as dangerous to the wielder as they are to their opponents. This approach to combat reflects a philosophical commitment to the pursuit of perfection through the acceptance of risk and the willingness to embrace uncertainty as a fundamental aspect of existence. The signature weapons of the Cursed Blade incorporate elements of controlled chaos that make them unpredictable in combat while providing devastating effects when used by skilled practitioners. These weapons often feature mechanisms that can malfunction or behave unpredictably, requiring warriors to develop the reflexes and judgment necessary to adapt to changing circumstances in the middle of combat. The training regimens employed by the cult focus on developing the mental flexibility and physical coordination necessary to master these challenging weapons. The Cult of the Cursed Blade's approach to combat philosophy emphasizes the importance of embracing uncertainty and finding opportunity within apparent disadvantage. Warriors are taught to view setbacks and failures as learning experiences that can provide insights into new techniques and approaches. This philosophy extends beyond combat training to encompass a general approach to life that values adaptability and resilience over rigid adherence to predetermined plans. The membership of the Cursed Blade tends to attract individuals who possess natural talents for improvisation and creative problem solving, characteristics that are essential for success with the cult's preferred fighting methods. The organization's recruitment practices focus on identifying candidates who demonstrate the psychological flexibility necessary to thrive in an environment where traditional approaches to combat may prove inadequate or counterproductive. The Cult of the Red Grief represents a different approach to witch combat, focusing on the cultivation of berserker fury and the channeling of rage into devastating combat effectiveness. The cult's warriors are trained to enter trance-like states during combat that allow them to ignore pain and fatigue while maintaining the precision necessary for effective fighting. This approach requires extensive mental conditioning and physical preparation to achieve safely, as the line between controlled fury and self-destructive madness is often dangerously thin. The training methods employed by the Red Grief incorporate elements of psychological conditioning that help warriors learn to control their emotional states and channel their aggression in productive directions. Students are taught meditation techniques that allow them to achieve the mental clarity necessary for entering combat trances, while physical training focuses on developing the stamina and resilience needed to maintain peak performance during extended periods of intense fighting. The weapons favored by Red Grief warriors are typically designed to complement their aggressive fighting style, with emphasis placed on items that can deliver devastating attacks while remaining effective during prolonged combat. Many members prefer weapons that become more effective as combat continues, reflecting the cult's philosophy that true mastery comes through the willingness to commit fully to the fight regardless of personal cost. The screaming begins before dawn in the laboratories of the Prophets of Flesh, a sound that has echoed through the twisted corridors of their domain for over 8 millennia. Within chambers that defy conventional architecture, where walls pulse with organic rhythms and floors consist of living tissue that responds to the footsteps of those who walk upon them, the homunculi pursue their grotesque craft with the dedication of artists and the precision of surgeons. These ancient beings represent perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Drukhari society, practitioners of sciences so advanced and so utterly divorced from conventional morality that their very existence challenges the fundamental concepts of life, death, and identity. The homunculi emerged from the ashes of the fall as the keepers of knowledge that predated the birth of Slaanesh, survivors who had delved so deeply into the mysteries of flesh and spirit that they transcended the normal limitations of mortality through means that would horrify even their fellow Drukhari. During the height of the ancient Eldari Empire, these individuals had served as healers, life shapers, and biological engineers, using their mastery of genetic manipulation and surgical techniques to maintain the physical perfection that their species prized above all else. The pleasure cults that consumed the empire in its final centuries provided them with unprecedented opportunities to explore the boundaries between enhancement and degradation, healing and harm. When the psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth tore through the galaxy, the proto-homunculi found themselves changed in ways that went far beyond the spiritual curse that afflicted all surviving Eldari. Their extensive modifications to their own bodies and their deep understanding of the connections between flesh and soul allowed them to survive the catastrophe in a form that was no longer entirely biological. The pain and terror released by trillions of dying Eldari had soaked into their very essence, transforming them into beings that existed in a state somewhere between life and death, sustained by suffering in ways that even other Drukhari found difficult to comprehend. The retreat into the Webway provided the homunculi with the perfect environment for their continued experiments, offering them access to pocket dimensions, where they could conduct their work without interference from the chaotic forces that ravaged real space. The malleable nature of these dimensional spaces allowed them to create laboratories that incorporated living architecture, facilities that grew and evolved according to their needs while serving as extensions of their own consciousness. These organic structures became integral parts of their research, serving simultaneously as tools, test subjects, and repositories for the knowledge they accumulated over millennia of experimentation. The homunculi's approach to scientific inquiry differs fundamentally from that practiced by other advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Where the Adeptus Mechanicus seeks to understand the universe through the rigid application of established principles, and the Tau pursue knowledge through systematic observation and experimentation, the homunculi treat reality itself as a medium to be shaped and manipulated according to their desires. Their laboratories are not merely places where experiments are conducted, but living entities that participate in the research process, contributing their own insights and observations to the accumulated body of knowledge. The relationship between a homunculus and their laboratory represents one of the most intimate bonds possible within Drukhari society, a connection that transcends the normal boundaries between creator and creation. The laboratory serves as an extension of the homunculus's consciousness, responding to their thoughts and emotions while providing feedback that influences their decision-making processes. This symbiotic relationship allows for forms of experimentation that would be impossible using conventional methods, as the laboratory itself can suggest new approaches and provide insights that might not occur to its master. The process of creating a new laboratory begins with the selection of an appropriate dimensional space within the Webway, typically a pocket dimension that has been abandoned or conquered from its previous inhabitants. The homunculus then begins the delicate process of introducing organic components into the space, starting with simple cellular structures that can be programmed to grow and develop according to predetermined patterns. These initial introductions serve as the foundation for more complex structures that will eventually form the laboratory's walls, floors, and specialized equipment. The growth phase of laboratory development can take decades or even centuries to complete, as the organic components must be carefully guided through their development to ensure that they integrate properly with the dimensional space and each other. The homunculus must constantly monitor and adjust the growth process, introducing new genetic material and modifying existing structures as needed to achieve the desired results. The final product is a living entity that exists in perfect harmony with its environment while serving the specific needs of its creator. The equipment used within homunculus laboratories represents the pinnacle of biological engineering, incorporating technologies that blur the line between living tissue and mechanical devices. Surgical instruments grow from the laboratory walls when needed, their molecular structure optimized for specific procedures before being reabsorbed into the organic matrix when their task is complete. Monitoring devices consist of sensory organs that have been modified to detect and analyze phenomena that would be invisible to conventional instruments, providing data that is transmitted directly to the homunculus's consciousness through neural interfaces. The specimens maintained within these laboratories represent a comprehensive collection of biological diversity from across the galaxy, with examples of virtually every known form of life carefully preserved and cataloged for future study. The homunculi have developed techniques for maintaining living specimens in states of suspended animation that can preserve them indefinitely while allowing for detailed examination of their biological processes. These collections serve both as research materials and as sources of genetic material for use in creating new life forms. The resurrection technologies developed by the homunculi represent perhaps their most significant contribution to Drukhari society, providing the means by which wealthy and powerful individuals can cheat death and return to life after being killed in combat or through political assassination. The process of resurrection is far more complex than simple healing, requiring the reconstruction of not only the physical body, but also the memories and personality traits that define individual identity. The homunculi have developed techniques that allow them to capture and preserve these essential elements of consciousness, storing them in crystalline matrices that can survive the destruction of the original body. The resurrection process begins with the recovery of genetic material from the deceased individual, typically obtained from tissue samples that have been preserved for this specific purpose. The homunculi use this material to grow a new body that is identical to the original in every physical respect, incorporating any modifications or enhancements that were present at the time of death. The process of physical reconstruction can take several months to complete, as the new body must be carefully grown and developed to ensure that all systems function properly. The restoration of consciousness represents the most challenging aspect of the resurrection process, requiring the homunculi to transfer the stored memories and personality patterns into the new body's neural structures. This process must be conducted with extreme precision, as any errors in the transfer can result in personality changes, memory loss, or complete psychological breakdown. The most skilled homunculi can perform resurrections that are virtually indistinguishable from the original individual, though the process inevitably leaves subtle changes that can be detected by those who knew the person well. The cost of resurrection services reflects both the complexity of the process and the value that Drukhari society places on continued existence. Only the wealthiest and most powerful individuals can afford to maintain the contracts necessary for guaranteed resurrection, and even then the process is not without risks. The homunculi who perform these services maintain strict confidentiality regarding their clients, as the knowledge of who has access to resurrection technologies can be used as a weapon in the complex political games that dominate Drukhari society. The Prophets of Flesh stand as the most powerful and influential of the homunculus covens, an organization that has achieved dominance through their mastery of resurrection technologies and their unparalleled skill in biological manipulation. The coven's laboratories occupy vast territories within Commorragh's lower levels, sprawling complexes that extend through multiple dimensions and incorporate some of the most advanced biological engineering facilities in existence. The architecture of these laboratories reflects the Coven's philosophy of organic integration, with structures that appear to have been grown rather than built and surfaces that pulse with the rhythms of artificial life. The leadership of the Prophets of Flesh is dominated by ancient homunculi who have survived for millennia through a combination of surgical self-modification and careful political maneuvering. These individuals have transformed themselves so extensively that they bear little resemblance to their original forms, incorporating organs and limbs from dozens of different species, while maintaining the intellectual capacity necessary for their complex work. The most senior members of the Coven have become living repositories of biological knowledge, their modified brains capable of storing and processing information at rates that exceed the capabilities of even the most advanced cogitators. The Prophets of Flesh maintain extensive networks of contacts throughout Drukhari society, providing resurrection services to clients who include some of the most powerful archons and succubi in Commorragh. These relationships provide the Coven with significant political influence and access to resources that would be unavailable to organizations focused solely on research activities. The Coven's contracts often include provisions that allow them to study their clients' biological processes, providing valuable data that contributes to their ongoing research efforts. The specialization of the Prophets of Flesh in resurrection technologies has led to the development of increasingly sophisticated techniques that push the boundaries of what is possible within the constraints of biological science. The Coven's researchers have developed methods for preserving consciousness in artificial substrates, allowing for forms of immortality that do not require the maintenance of organic bodies. These technologies represent the cutting edge of homunculus research and are closely guarded secrets that the Coven shares only with their most trusted allies. The Coven of 12 represents a different approach to homunculus research, focusing on the creation of artificial life forms that can serve specific functions within Drukhari society. The Coven's name derives from the 12 original members who founded the organization in the early centuries following the fall, each of whom specialized in different aspects of biological engineering. The current membership of the Coven maintains this tradition of specialization, with individual members focusing on particular types of creatures or specific applications of biological manipulation. The laboratories of the Coven of 12 are organized around the principle of collaborative research, with different sections dedicated to the various specializations represented within the organization. The Coven's facilities include breeding chambers for the cultivation of new life forms, genetic libraries containing samples from across the galaxy, and testing facilities where newly created organisms can be evaluated under controlled conditions. The architecture of these laboratories incorporates elements that facilitate communication and cooperation between different research groups, while maintaining the security necessary to protect valuable research data. The Coven of 12 has achieved particular success in the creation of servitor organisms that can perform specialized functions within Drukhari society. These creatures are designed to serve specific purposes, from maintenance and construction tasks to security and combat applications. The Coven's researchers have developed techniques for programming complex behaviors into these organisms, creating creatures that can operate independently while remaining loyal to their creators. The most successful of these creations have become integral parts of Drukhari infrastructure, performing tasks that would otherwise require significant investment in mechanical systems. The collaborative nature of the Coven of 12's research has led to innovations that would be difficult to achieve through individual effort alone. The combination of different specializations and perspectives has resulted in breakthrough discoveries that have advanced the overall understanding of biological manipulation throughout the homunculus community. The Coven maintains extensive records of their research findings and shares selected information with other organizations through carefully negotiated agreements that benefit all parties involved. The Hex represents the most secretive and mysterious of the major homunculus covens, an organization that has built its reputation on the development of biological weapons and the creation of organisms designed specifically for warfare applications. The Coven's laboratories are hidden in the deepest levels of Commorragh's dimensional structure, occupying pocket dimensions that have been heavily fortified and protected by both technological and biological security systems. The location and layout of these facilities are closely guarded secrets, known only to the Coven's members and their most trusted allies. The research conducted by the Hex focuses on the weaponization of biological processes, developing organisms and substances that can be used to devastating effect in combat situations. The Coven's scientists have created toxins that can target specific genetic markers, allowing for the selective elimination of particular species or populations. They have also developed parasitic organisms that can infiltrate enemy forces and disrupt their operations from within, creating chaos and confusion that can be exploited by conventional military forces. The members of the Hex are known for their paranoid security measures and their reluctance to share information with outsiders, characteristics that have served them well in the dangerous environment of Drukhari politics. The Coven maintains multiple layers of security around their research activities, using both technological systems and biological guardians to protect their facilities from intrusion. The organization's contracts with other Drukhari factions typically include strict confidentiality provisions and severe penalties for any breach of security. The biological weapons developed by the Hex represent some of the most feared instruments of warfare in Drukhari arsenals, capable of effects that range from immediate death to prolonged suffering that can last for years. The Coven's researchers have mastered the art of creating substances that can cause specific types of damage while avoiding detection by conventional medical techniques. These weapons are highly sought after by cabals and witch cults that specialize in particular types of operations, though the cost and security requirements associated with their acquisition limit their availability to only the most wealthy and powerful clients. The creation of grotesques represents one of the most visible and disturbing applications of homunculus flesh crafting techniques, transforming captured prisoners into living weapons that serve as both instruments of war and symbols of their creator's power. The process of creating a grotesque begins with the selection of suitable subjects, typically individuals who possess the physical characteristics and mental resilience necessary to survive the extensive modifications that will be performed upon them. The transformation process can take months or even years to complete, as the subject's body must be gradually modified to accommodate the various enhancements and weapons that will be integrated into their anatomy. The surgical procedures involved in grotesque creation push the boundaries of what is possible within the constraints of biological science, requiring techniques that can modify fundamental aspects of the subject's physiology while maintaining the basic functions necessary for survival. The homunculi performing these operations must possess not only exceptional surgical skill, but also a deep understanding of the psychological processes that govern consciousness and identity. The goal is to create beings that retain enough of their original personality to be capable of independent thought, while removing the capacity for resistance or disobedience. The physical modifications made to grotesques vary depending on their intended function and the preferences of their creators, but typically include the integration of weapon systems, armor plating, and sensory enhancements that transform them into living instruments of destruction. The most common modifications involve the replacement of limbs with mechanical appendages that incorporate various weapons, from simple blades and clubs to more sophisticated devices that can project energy beams or toxic substances. The integration of these systems requires careful attention to the subject's nervous system, ensuring that they can control their new appendages while maintaining the reflexes necessary for effective combat. The psychological conditioning applied to grotesques represents an equally important aspect of their creation, as the trauma of the physical modifications must be channeled in ways that enhance their effectiveness as weapons while preventing complete mental breakdown. The homunculi use a combination of chemical treatments, neural conditioning, and psychological manipulation to reshape their subjects' personalities, removing concepts like fear and self-preservation while enhancing aggression and loyalty to their creators. The process requires constant monitoring and adjustment to ensure that the subject remains functional while achieving the desired behavioral modifications. The creation of racks follows similar principles, but focuses on the development of servants and assistants rather than combat units, resulting in modifications that emphasize utility and functionality over pure destructive capability. The subjects selected for rack conversion are typically chosen for their intelligence and technical skills rather than their physical characteristics, as these creatures are intended to serve as extensions of their creators' capabilities rather than independent weapons. The transformation process involves less extensive physical modification, but requires more sophisticated neural conditioning to ensure that the subjects retain their useful skills while becoming completely subservient to their masters. The surgical techniques used in rack creation focus on the integration of specialized tools and sensory equipment that enhance the subject's ability to perform complex tasks under their master's direction. Common modifications include the replacement of hands with precision instruments, the integration of sensory organs that can detect phenomena invisible to normal perception, and the installation of neural interfaces that allow for direct communication with homunculus laboratory systems. These modifications are designed to be reversible in case the subject proves unsuitable for their intended role, though such reversals are rarely performed due to the time and resources required. The psychological conditioning applied to racks is more subtle than that used for grotesques, focusing on the enhancement of loyalty and obedience while preserving the cognitive functions necessary for complex problem solving. The process involves the careful modification of the subject's reward systems, creating powerful psychological incentives for compliance while removing the capacity for independent decision-making. The most successful racks become extensions of their master's consciousness, capable of anticipating needs and responding to subtle cues without requiring explicit instructions. The transformation of racks represents only the beginning of the homunculi's mastery over flesh and spirit, for their deepest understanding lies not in the manipulation of physical form, but in the fundamental curse that drives all Drukhari existence. Every member of their species carries within them a spiritual wound that defies conventional healing, a metaphysical hunger that gnaws at their very essence with each passing moment. This supernatural thirst represents the most profound consequence of their ancestors' role in birthing Slaanesh, creating a connection between the Prince of Pleasure and every Eldari soul that transcends death itself. The nature of this curse extends far beyond simple spiritual discomfort, manifesting as a literal drain upon the life force of every Drukhari. Slaanesh's claim upon their souls creates a constant psychic suction that slowly draws their essence toward the Chaos God's realm in the warp, a process that would inevitably result in spiritual consumption and eternal torment if left unchecked. The sensation resembles a persistent ache that penetrates to the very core of their being, growing stronger with each passing day, as their natural life force diminishes under the relentless pull of their species' greatest enemy. The physical manifestations of this spiritual drain become increasingly apparent as the curse progresses unchecked. Drukhari who fail to regularly feed their thirst begin to show signs of accelerated aging that can transform a being who appears young and vital into a withered husk within a matter of weeks. The process begins subtly, with minor changes in skin texture and slight reductions in physical strength that might be attributed to normal fatigue. However, the deterioration rapidly accelerates as the curse tightens its grip, causing dramatic weight loss, the appearance of deep wrinkles, and a general wasting that affects every system within the body. The psychological effects of the unfed thirst prove equally devastating, as the constant drain upon their essence creates a form of spiritual starvation that affects cognitive function and emotional stability. Drukhari experiencing advanced stages of the curse report feelings of overwhelming emptiness and despair that go beyond normal depression, describing sensations of being slowly erased from existence. The hunger creates an obsessive focus on finding sources of psychic sustenance that can override all other considerations, driving even the most disciplined individuals to desperate acts in their search for relief. The discovery that the suffering of others could temporarily alleviate this spiritual hunger represented a crucial breakthrough in Drukhari survival, though the mechanism by which this process functions remains poorly understood even by the homunculi who have studied it most extensively. The psychic energy released by beings experiencing intense pain, terror, or despair somehow provides nourishment that can replenish the Drukhari's diminishing life force, creating a feedback loop that temporarily satisfies Slaanesh's claim while providing the sustenance necessary for continued existence. The quality and intensity of suffering determines the effectiveness of this spiritual feeding, with different types of pain and terror providing varying levels of nourishment. Physical agony produces a steady stream of psychic energy that can sustain a Drukhari for extended periods, but the most potent source of sustenance comes from psychological torment that breaks down the victim's mental defenses and exposes their deepest fears. The combination of physical and emotional suffering creates a synergistic effect that multiplies the available psychic energy, explaining the Drukhari's preference for torture techniques that attack both body and mind simultaneously. The process of psychic feeding occurs automatically whenever a Drukhari is present during the infliction of suffering, though the efficiency of energy absorption can be improved through various techniques and technologies developed over millennia of experimentation. The most basic form of feeding simply requires proximity to suffering beings, with the Drukhari's cursed soul naturally drawing in the released psychic energy like a spiritual vacuum. However, more sophisticated methods involve the use of specialized equipment that can focus and concentrate the energy, allowing for more efficient absorption and longer-lasting effects. The torture chambers found throughout Commorragh incorporate architectural elements specifically designed to enhance the psychic feeding process, with crystalline formations that can capture and amplify the energy released by suffering victims. These pain crystals serve multiple functions within Drukhari society, providing both illumination and spiritual sustenance, while creating an environment that maximizes the psychological impact on prisoners. The crystals resonate with the frequency of psychic pain, creating harmonics that can intensify the victim's suffering while making the energy more accessible to nearby Drukhari. The development of portable feeding devices has allowed Drukhari raiders to sustain themselves during extended operations away from Commorragh, ensuring that they can maintain their strength while conducting the slave raids that provide both immediate nourishment and future resources. These devices range from simple crystalline matrices that can store psychic energy for later consumption to sophisticated neural interfaces that allow for direct connection to suffering victims. The most advanced feeding equipment can process multiple sources of pain simultaneously, allowing a single Drukhari to sustain themselves from an entire group of captives. The timing and frequency of psychic feeding represents a crucial aspect of Drukhari survival strategy, as the effects of spiritual nourishment are temporary and must be regularly renewed to prevent the onset of the curse's more severe symptoms. Most Drukhari require some form of feeding at least once every few days to maintain their physical and mental health, though individuals with stronger constitutions or more efficient feeding techniques may be able to extend this period. The amount of sustenance required varies based on factors including the individual's age, physical condition, and level of activity, with warriors engaged in strenuous combat requiring more frequent feeding than those who lead sedentary lives. The social implications of the feeding requirement have shaped every aspect of Drukhari culture, creating a society built around the systematic infliction of suffering and the efficient extraction of psychic energy from victims. The need for constant access to sources of pain has driven the development of sophisticated slave trading networks that ensure a steady supply of victims, while the competition for the most potent sources of suffering has created complex hierarchies based on access to premium feeding opportunities. The various methods of soul feeding employed by different segments of Drukhari society reflect both practical considerations and philosophical differences about the most effective approaches to spiritual sustenance. The cabals typically favor direct methods that involve the systematic torture of captured slaves, using techniques that have been refined over millennia to maximize both the duration and intensity of suffering. Their torture chambers are equipped with devices that can maintain victims in states of consciousness while inflicting precise amounts of pain, allowing for extended feeding sessions that can sustain multiple Drukhari for days or weeks. The approach favored by cabal torturers emphasizes efficiency and reliability, using proven techniques that can guarantee specific levels of psychic energy output from different types of victims. The most skilled practitioners can calibrate their methods to extract maximum nourishment while prolonging the victim's useful lifespan, creating sustainable sources of spiritual sustenance that can be maintained for months or even years. These techniques require extensive knowledge of anatomy, psychology, and the subtle interactions between physical and spiritual pain that determine the quality of psychic energy released. The witch cults have developed their own distinct approaches to psychic feeding that incorporate the spectacle and artistry that define their culture. The suffering generated during arena combats provides nourishment not only for the participants, but also for the thousands of spectators who attend these events, creating communal feeding experiences that strengthen social bonds while satisfying individual needs. The energy released by dying gladiators possesses unique qualities that many Drukhari find particularly satisfying, combining the intensity of mortal terror with the aesthetic appreciation of skillfully executed violence. The ritualistic aspects of arena combat enhance the psychic feeding process by creating emotional resonances that amplify the available energy, with the crowd's excitement and bloodlust adding additional layers to the spiritual nourishment available to participants. The most successful arena events create feedback loops where the audience's reaction intensifies the combatant's performance, which in turn generates more psychic energy for all present to consume. The timing and pacing of these events are carefully orchestrated to maximize both entertainment value and spiritual sustenance. The homunculi approach psychic feeding with the same scientific rigor they apply to all aspects of their craft, developing techniques that push the boundaries of what is possible within the constraints of biological and spiritual science. Their laboratories serve as controlled environments where the variables affecting psychic energy production can be isolated and studied, leading to innovations that have improved feeding efficiency throughout Drukhari society. The most advanced homunculus feeding techniques can extract energy from victims who are technically dead, tapping into residual spiritual essence that would normally dissipate within hours of biological death. The experimental nature of homunculus feeding methods has led to the development of techniques that border on the supernatural, incorporating elements of psychic manipulation and dimensional science that allow for forms of sustenance unavailable through conventional torture. Some homunculi have learned to feed directly upon the life force of their victims without causing physical pain, creating a more subtle but equally effective form of spiritual vampirism. These techniques require extensive modification of the practitioner's own spiritual anatomy, often involving surgical procedures that alter the fundamental nature of their soul's connection to the warp. The process of psychic vampirism represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of soul feeding developed by the Drukhari, allowing practitioners to drain life force directly from their victims through spiritual rather than physical means. This technique requires the establishment of a psychic connection between predator and prey, typically achieved through extended physical contact or the use of specialized equipment designed to facilitate spiritual linkage. Once the connection is established, the Drukhari can draw upon their victim's life force as if it were their own, sustaining themselves while slowly killing their prey through spiritual exhaustion. The advantages of psychic vampirism over conventional torture methods include its subtlety and efficiency, as victims may not realize they are being drained until the process is well advanced. The technique also allows for feeding without the noise and mess associated with physical torture, making it ideal for situations where discretion is required. However, the process requires significant skill and concentration to perform safely, as improper technique can result in feedback that damages the practitioner's own spiritual anatomy. The long-term effects of psychic vampirism on both predator and prey remain poorly understood, even by the homunculi who have studied the phenomenon most extensively. Victims of prolonged vampiric feeding often display symptoms that go beyond simple physical weakness, including memory loss, personality changes, and spiritual damage that can persist long after the feeding has ceased. Some subjects never fully recover from the experience, remaining in a state of spiritual diminishment that makes them unsuitable for future feeding attempts. The practitioners of psychic vampirism face their own risks, as the intimate connection required for effective feeding can result in contamination by their victims' thoughts and emotions. Extended use of vampiric techniques has been known to cause personality changes in the predator, with some individuals gradually adopting characteristics and memories from their prey. The most extreme cases involve complete identity confusion, where the practitioner becomes unable to distinguish between their own thoughts and those absorbed from their victims. The consequences of failing to maintain adequate psychic feeding create a downward spiral that inevitably leads to spiritual consumption by Slaanesh, though the timeline and specific symptoms vary based on individual factors and circumstances. The initial stages of starvation manifest as increased fatigue and difficulty concentrating, symptoms that might be mistaken for normal exhaustion or illness. However, the condition rapidly progresses to more severe manifestations that clearly indicate the spiritual nature of the underlying problem. The physical deterioration associated with unfed spiritual hunger follows a predictable pattern that has been documented extensively by homunculus researchers studying the phenomenon. The victim's skin begins to lose its natural elasticity and color, taking on a grayish pallor that becomes more pronounced as the condition advances. Muscle mass decreases rapidly despite adequate nutrition, creating a wasted appearance that no amount of physical exercise can reverse. The hair becomes brittle and begins to fall out in patches, while the eyes develop a sunken appearance that reflects the spiritual emptiness consuming the individual from within. The psychological symptoms of advanced spiritual starvation prove even more devastating than the physical changes, as the victim's personality begins to fragment under the pressure of Slaanesh's increasing influence. The constant spiritual drain creates a form of existential terror that goes beyond normal fear, generating feelings of impending dissolution that can drive even the strongest minds to madness. The victim becomes increasingly desperate in their search for sources of psychic sustenance, often abandoning all pretense of dignity or restraint in their attempts to find relief from the spiritual agony that consumes them. The final stages of spiritual starvation occur rapidly once the victim's natural defenses have been completely overwhelmed by the curse's progression. The individual begins to experience episodes where their consciousness seems to slip away from their body, creating moments of disconnection that become longer and more frequent as the condition advances. During these episodes, observers report that the victim's eyes become completely black and their voice changes to something that sounds distinctly inhuman, suggesting that Slaanesh's influence is beginning to manifest directly through their failing spiritual defenses. The actual moment of soul consumption occurs when the victim's spiritual reserves are finally exhausted, and Slaanesh's claim can no longer be resisted. The process appears to outside observers as a sudden collapse followed by rapid decomposition of the physical body, but psychically sensitive individuals report sensing the victim's soul being torn away from their corpse and drawn into the warp. The speed of this final consumption suggests that the soul is pulled directly into Slaanesh's realm, where it faces an eternity of torment that makes the suffering experienced during the starvation process seem trivial by comparison. The fear of this ultimate fate drives much of Drukhari behavior and serves as the primary motivation for their continued participation in the systematic infliction of suffering that defines their society. The knowledge that failure to feed regularly will result in spiritual consumption creates a desperate urgency that overrides most other considerations, explaining the ruthless efficiency with which they conduct their raids and the callous disregard they show for the welfare of other species. The curse has effectively transformed an entire civilization into a predatory organism that must consume the pain of others to survive, creating a feedback loop of cruelty that has perpetuated itself for over 10 millennia. The development of techniques for recognizing and treating the early stages of spiritual starvation has become a crucial skill within Drukhari society, as the ability to identify and address feeding deficiencies can mean the difference between continued existence and eternal damnation. The most experienced practitioners can detect the subtle signs of spiritual hunger before they become physically apparent, allowing for intervention that can prevent the more severe symptoms from developing. However, the treatment invariably requires access to sources of fresh suffering, creating additional pressure on the slave trading networks that supply Commorragh's markets with victims. The armories of Commorragh contain instruments of death that would make even the most hardened Imperial Guard veteran recoil in horror, not merely because of their lethality, but due to the philosophical principles that guided their creation. Every weapon forged within the Dark City's workshops represents a conscious rejection of the clean, efficient killing favored by other advanced civilizations, where the Imperium's bolters are designed to deliver swift death through explosive rounds, and the Tau's pulse rifles offer precise elimination of targets. Drukhari weaponry embodies a fundamentally different approach to warfare that prioritizes the prolongation of suffering over tactical efficiency. The technological foundation underlying these weapons of exquisite cruelty draws upon scientific principles that predate the fall of the Eldari Empire, incorporating knowledge that was ancient when humanity first discovered fire. The dark technology employed by Drukhari weaponsmiths represents a perversion of the advanced materials science and energy manipulation techniques that once served to heal and protect, twisted into forms that maximize pain while ensuring the victim remains conscious to experience every moment of their torment. The crystalline matrices that power these devices resonate with frequencies specifically calibrated to interact with neural pathways, creating effects that go beyond simple physical damage to attack the very essence of their target's capacity for rational thought. The splinter weapons that form the backbone of Drukhari infantry armaments exemplify this philosophy of weaponized suffering, utilizing projectiles that fragment upon impact to create wounds that resist conventional medical treatment, while delivering toxins designed to heighten the victim's sensitivity to pain. The ammunition consists of crystalline shards grown in specialized laboratories where they are exposed to concentrated psychic agony, a process that imbues the projectiles with properties that allow them to bypass most forms of armor, while creating wounds that channel the victims suffering directly to nearby Drukhari. The manufacturing process requires the constant presence of tortured subjects, whose screams are focused through harmonic resonators into the growing crystal matrix, creating ammunition that literally carries the essence of pain within its molecular structure. The splinter rifle represents the most common application of this technology, a weapon that appears deceptively elegant with its flowing lines and organic curves that seem to grow naturally from the crystalline components integrated into its structure. The rifle's firing mechanism operates through a combination of magnetic acceleration and dimensional manipulation that propels the splinter rounds at velocities that would shatter conventional projectiles, while the weapon's targeting systems incorporate psychic resonance detectors that can track the emotional state of potential targets. The most sophisticated versions of these weapons can adjust their firing parameters based on the psychological profile of their intended victim, selecting ammunition types and impact locations calculated to maximize both physical damage and psychological trauma. The ammunition feed system of a splinter rifle draws rounds from crystalline magazines that serve as both storage containers and psychic amplifiers, channeling the weapon's targeting data through the stored ammunition to optimize each shot for maximum effect. The magazines themselves are works of art, their translucent surfaces revealing the deadly beauty of the splinter rounds, within while displaying patterns of light that shift and flow in response to the psychic emanations of nearby suffering. The most prized magazines are those that have been used in particularly successful raids, their crystal matrices permanently altered by exposure to exceptional levels of pain and terror. The Shredder represents an evolution of splinter technology that sacrifices range and accuracy for devastating close-range effects, firing clouds of micro-crystalline fragments that can strip flesh from bone while delivering concentrated doses of exotic toxins. The weapon's barrel incorporates a series of resonance chambers that fragment the ammunition into thousands of microscopic projectiles, each one carrying a different toxin designed to attack specific biological systems. The resulting cloud of deadly fragments creates a cone of destruction that can affect multiple targets simultaneously, making the Shredder particularly effective in confined spaces where enemies cannot avoid the weapon's area of effect. The toxins delivered by Shredder ammunition represent some of the most sophisticated biochemical weapons ever developed, incorporating compounds that can target specific genetic markers while bypassing the natural resistances that many species have developed to conventional poisons. The most common toxin types include neural disruptors that cause uncontrollable muscle spasms, blood agents that prevent clotting while increasing sensitivity to pain, and psychoactive compounds that induce hallucinations and paranoia. The combination of multiple toxin types in a single ammunition load creates synergistic effects that multiply the weapon's lethality while ensuring that victims experience maximum suffering before succumbing to their wounds. The Dark Lance technology employed by Drukhari heavy weapons represents a completely different approach to inflicting suffering, utilizing focused beams of dark energy that can penetrate the heaviest armor while causing damage that defies conventional understanding of physics. The energy beam appears as a lance of absolute darkness that seems to absorb light from its surroundings, creating a visual effect that is both beautiful and terrifying to witness. The weapon's targeting system can focus the beam to create precise wounds that sever specific nerve clusters, allowing skilled operators to disable their targets without killing them immediately, while ensuring that the victim remains conscious to experience the full extent of their injuries. The power source for Dark Lance weapons consists of crystalline cores that tap directly into the dimensional energies that flow through the Webway, drawing upon the same forces that allow the Drukhari to travel between worlds instantaneously. The process of creating these power cores requires the sacrifice of particularly strong-willed victims, whose life force is bound into the crystal matrix through rituals that combine advanced technology with practices that predate the rise of civilization. The resulting energy source provides virtually unlimited power while retaining traces of the victim's consciousness, creating weapons that seem to possess a malevolent intelligence of their own. The Agonizer represents perhaps the most iconic of Drukhari close combat weapons, a device that appears as an elegant whip or flail, whose striking surfaces incorporate neural disruptors that can cause excruciating pain without necessarily inflicting permanent physical damage. The weapon's design allows for precise control over the level of suffering inflicted, with settings that range from mild discomfort to agony so intense that it can cause permanent psychological damage. The most skilled wielders can use an agonizer to torture their victims for hours while keeping them conscious and aware, extracting maximum psychic energy while demonstrating their mastery of the weapon's subtle controls. The construction of an agonizer requires materials that can conduct both electrical energy and psychic emanations, typically incorporating metals that have been exposed to prolonged torture sessions and crystalline components grown in environments saturated with pain and terror. The weapon's handle contains control systems that allow the wielder to adjust the intensity and type of neural disruption delivered with each strike, while sensory feedback systems provide information about the victim's pain levels and psychological state. The most advanced agonizers can learn from their use, developing preferences for particular types of suffering and automatically adjusting their settings to maximize the agony inflicted upon specific target types. The electrocorrosive whip represents a variant of agonizer technology that combines neural disruption with chemical agents that can dissolve armor and flesh while causing wounds that resist healing. The weapon's striking surface is covered with microscopic projectors that spray corrosive compounds at the moment of impact, creating wounds that continue to expand and deepen long after the initial strike. The combination of electrical shock, chemical burning, and neural disruption creates a symphony of suffering that can incapacitate even the most resilient opponents while providing the wielder with sustained psychic nourishment. The power weapons favored by Drukhari nobles incorporate force field generators that create cutting edges of pure energy, but unlike the power swords used by Imperial forces, these weapons are designed to cauterize wounds as they are inflicted while delivering electrical shocks that keep the victim conscious. The energy field can be modulated to create different types of cuts, from precise surgical incisions that sever specific nerve clusters to ragged tears that maximize bleeding and pain. The most sophisticated power weapons can adjust their cutting parameters in real time based on the target's biology, ensuring optimal suffering regardless of the victim's species or physical characteristics. The husk blade represents one of the most feared weapons in the Drukhari arsenal, a sword whose edge exists partially within the warp and can drain the life force from its victims with each cut. The weapon appears as a conventional blade until it strikes living flesh, at which point the edge phases into the target's spiritual anatomy and begins to consume their soul directly. The process is visible to psychically sensitive observers as streams of luminous energy flowing from the wound into the blade's crystalline core, where the stolen life force is stored for later use by the weapon's wielder. The creation of husk blades requires the sacrifice of powerful psychers whose souls are bound into the weapon's matrix through rituals that combine Drukhari technology with knowledge stolen from the warp itself. The resulting weapon possesses a hunger that mirrors that of its creators, actively seeking opportunities to feed upon the life force of living beings. The most potent husk blades have consumed hundreds of souls over their existence, their crystalline cores glowing with the trapped essence of their victims, while whispering promises of power to those who wield them. The exotic torture devices employed by the Drukhari extend far beyond simple weapons to encompass elaborate mechanisms designed specifically for the extraction of psychic energy through prolonged suffering. The pain amplifiers found in torture chambers throughout Commorragh represent technological marvels that can increase a victim's sensitivity to pain by orders of magnitude, while preventing the natural unconsciousness that would normally provide escape from extreme agony. These devices work by intercepting and modifying the neural signals that carry pain information to the brain, amplifying the sensation while blocking the body's natural defense mechanisms. The most sophisticated pain amplifiers incorporate psychic resonance technology that can detect and enhance specific types of suffering, allowing torturers to focus on particular fears or phobias that cause maximum psychological damage. The devices can be calibrated to target different aspects of the victim's consciousness, from basic physical sensations to complex emotional responses and existential fears. The resulting torture sessions can continue for days or weeks without causing death, providing sustained nourishment for multiple Drukhari, while serving as entertainment for spectators who appreciate the artistry involved in prolonged suffering. The soul trap technology developed by homunculus covens represents the ultimate expression of Drukhari cruelty, creating devices that can capture and preserve the consciousness of dying victims while their bodies are subjected to ongoing torture. The trapped souls remain aware of their situation, but are powerless to escape or resist, forced to experience whatever torments their captors devise while serving as permanent sources of psychic energy. The technology combines advanced crystalline matrices with dimensional manipulation techniques that allow consciousness to exist independently of biological substrates. The creation of soul traps requires the cooperation of skilled homunculi and weaponsmiths working together to create devices that can interface with both physical and spiritual anatomy. The process involves the construction of crystalline matrices that can resonate with the specific frequency of consciousness itself, creating containers that can hold sentient awareness indefinitely without degradation. The most advanced soul traps can hold multiple consciousness simultaneously, creating communities of trapped souls that can be forced to interact with each other in ways that generate additional suffering. The philosophical principles underlying Drukhari weapon design reflect a fundamental understanding of the relationship between suffering and spiritual nourishment that goes beyond simple sadism to encompass a comprehensive worldview about the nature of existence itself. The Drukhari believe that consciousness is most fully expressed through the experience of extremes, whether pleasure or pain, and that the artificial boundaries imposed by conventional morality serve only to limit the potential for true understanding. Their weapons are designed to break down these boundaries and force their victims to confront the full spectrum of sensation and emotion that defines sentient existence. The emphasis on prolonged suffering over quick death reflects practical considerations as well as philosophical ones, as the psychic energy released by dying victims provides only a brief surge of nourishment compared to the sustained feeding possible through extended torture. The Drukhari have learned that the quality of suffering is as important as its intensity, with certain types of pain and terror providing more potent spiritual sustenance than others. This knowledge has led to the development of increasingly sophisticated techniques for categorizing and optimizing different forms of torment, creating a science of suffering that rivals the most advanced medical knowledge possessed by other civilizations. The integration of feeding mechanisms into combat weapons represents a practical solution to the problem of maintaining spiritual nourishment during extended military operations, allowing Drukhari warriors to sustain themselves through the suffering they inflict upon their enemies. The most advanced weapons incorporate psychic collection systems that can store the energy released by wounded opponents, creating portable sources of spiritual nourishment that can be accessed when needed. These systems have proven particularly valuable during long-range raids where access to traditional torture facilities is limited. The aesthetic considerations that influence Drukhari weapon design reflect their cultural emphasis on the elevation of cruelty to an art form, with each instrument of torture serving as both functional tool and artistic statement. The flowing lines and organic curves that characterize their weapons are not merely decorative, but serve to enhance the psychological impact on both victims and observers, creating visual representations of the pain and suffering that the weapons are designed to inflict. The most prized weapons are those that combine maximum effectiveness with exceptional beauty, creating objects that can be appreciated as works of art even as they serve their deadly purpose. The competitive nature of Drukhari society has driven continuous innovation in weapon technology, with different factions and organizations constantly seeking to develop new methods of inflicting suffering that will provide advantages over their rivals. The weaponsmiths of Commorragh guard their secrets jealously, using techniques passed down through generations of craftsmen while incorporating new discoveries made through ongoing experimentation. The most successful innovations are those that can be adapted for use by different types of warriors, from the basic infantry of the Cabals to the specialized gladiators of the witch cults. The maintenance and care of Drukhari weapons requires specialized knowledge and techniques that reflect their unique construction and operating principles. The crystalline components that power many weapons must be regularly recharged through exposure to suffering, while the organic elements incorporated into their structure require feeding with specific types of biological material. The most complex weapons require the services of skilled technicians who understand both the technological and spiritual aspects of their operation, creating a specialized class of weapon keepers who command high prices for their services. The trading networks that supply exotic materials for weapon construction extend throughout the galaxy, with Drukhari merchants maintaining contacts with suppliers who can provide rare minerals, exotic biologicals, and captured psychers needed for the most advanced weapons. The most valuable materials are those that have been exposed to particular types of suffering or have natural properties that enhance the weapon's effectiveness. The competition for these materials has led to the development of specialized raiding operations focused on acquiring specific resources rather than general slave taking. The acquisition of exotic materials for weapon construction represents only a fraction of the resources that flow into Commorragh through the systematic predation that defines Drukhari existence. The slave markets, torture chambers, and feeding halls of the Dark City require a constant influx of fresh victims to maintain the complex ecosystem of suffering that sustains their civilization. This demand has driven the development of the most sophisticated raiding operations in the galaxy military campaigns that combine the speed of lightning warfare with the precision of surgical strikes to extract maximum value from each target while minimizing the risks to the attackers. The realspace raids launched from Commorragh represent the primary interface between the Drukhari and the broader galaxy, operations that serve multiple functions within their society while providing the resources necessary for their continued existence. These expeditions function simultaneously as military campaigns, economic ventures, and spiritual feeding opportunities, with success measured not merely in terms of slaves captured or territories conquered, but in the quality and quantity of suffering generated during the operation. The most successful raids achieve a perfect balance between efficiency and spectacle, overwhelming their targets with such devastating force that resistance becomes impossible, while ensuring that the psychological impact extends far beyond the immediate victims. The planning phase of a major realspace raid begins months or even years before the first ships depart from Commorragh, with intelligence networks throughout the galaxy providing detailed information about potential targets and their defensive capabilities. The Drukhari maintain extensive databases of information about imperial worlds, orc settlements, Tau colonies, and other civilizations, cataloging everything from population densities and military strength to cultural practices and psychological vulnerabilities that can be exploited during an attack. This intelligence gathering operation employs a combination of infiltration agents, captured prisoners, and purchased information from mercenaries and traders who serve the Dark City's interests. The selection of raid targets follows carefully calculated criteria that balance potential rewards against operational risks, with preference given to locations that offer high concentrations of suitable victims while possessing defensive capabilities that can be overwhelmed through superior speed and firepower. Imperial hive cities represent particularly attractive targets due to their massive populations and the variety of suffering that can be extracted from different social classes, while frontier settlements offer easier conquest but lower yields of psychic energy. The most prized targets are those that combine large populations with specific characteristics that make them particularly suitable for Drukhari purposes, such as worlds with strong artistic traditions or populations known for their emotional intensity. The intelligence requirements for successful raid planning extend beyond simple military reconnaissance to encompass detailed psychological profiles of target populations and their likely responses to different types of attack. The Drukhari have learned that the effectiveness of their raids depends heavily on their ability to generate maximum terror and confusion among their victims, breaking down organized resistance before it can form, while creating the psychological conditions necessary for optimal psychic feeding. This knowledge has led to the development of specialized terror tactics that are calibrated to exploit the specific fears and cultural taboos of different species and civilizations. The composition of a typical Drukhari raiding force reflects the multifaceted nature of their operations, combining elements from different organizations within Commorragh to create balanced forces capable of achieving diverse objectives. The backbone of most raids consists of Kabbalite warriors drawn from one or more of the major cabals, providing the disciplined infantry necessary for securing objectives and maintaining control over captured territories. These warriors bring with them the advanced weapons and equipment that have made Drukhari military forces feared throughout the galaxy, along with the tactical expertise developed through millennia of successful operations. The Kabbalite warriors selected for raiding operations represent the elite of their organizations, individuals who have proven themselves through successful participation in previous raids and demonstrated the combination of martial skill, tactical awareness, and psychological resilience necessary for extended operations in real space. These warriors undergo specialized training that prepares them for the unique challenges of operating outside the protected environment of Commorragh, including exposure to the psychic emanations of other species and the need to maintain spiritual nourishment through improvised feeding opportunities. The standard equipment loadout for Kabbalite warriors on raiding operations emphasizes mobility and firepower over heavy protection, reflecting the Drukhari preference for speed and surprise over prolonged engagements. The typical warrior carries a splinter rifle with multiple ammunition types, allowing for adaptation to different target types and tactical situations encountered during the raid. Secondary weapons include splinter pistols for close combat situations and various exotic devices designed for specific purposes such as prisoner restraint or crowd control. The organization of Kabbalite forces during raids follows a flexible structure that can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining the command and control necessary for coordinated operations. The basic unit consists of a squad of 10 warriors led by a Sybarite, with multiple squads forming larger formations under the command of Drakons or other high-ranking nobles. The command structure emphasizes initiative and adaptability, allowing individual units to respond to local conditions while maintaining overall coordination with the broader raiding force. The integration of witch cult warriors into raiding forces provides specialized capabilities that complement the firepower and discipline of the Kabbalite warriors, adding close combat expertise and psychological warfare capabilities that can prove decisive in urban combat situations. The witches bring with them not only their formidable fighting skills, but also their understanding of crowd psychology and their ability to generate terror through spectacular displays of violence. Their presence in a raiding force serves both practical and psychological purposes, providing effective close combat capabilities, while demonstrating the Drukhari's commitment to extracting maximum entertainment value from their operations. The selection of witch cult participants for raiding operations typically focuses on individuals who have demonstrated particular skill in combat against specific enemy types or in particular environmental conditions. Warriors who have specialized in fighting heavily armored opponents bring expertise that can prove valuable when confronting Imperial Guard forces or Space Marine defenders, while those trained in urban combat provide skills essential for operations in hive cities or other densely populated areas. The diversity of combat specializations represented within the witch cults ensures that raiding forces can include experts suited to virtually any tactical situation they might encounter. The equipment preferences of witch warriors during raids reflect their emphasis on mobility and close combat effectiveness, with loadouts that prioritize speed and agility over heavy firepower. The typical witch carries a combination of close combat weapons selected for their effectiveness against anticipated enemy types, along with minimal ranged weapons for situations where close combat is not practical. The specialized nature of witch equipment requires careful coordination with other elements of the raiding force to ensure that their capabilities are employed effectively within the overall tactical plan. The psychological impact of witch warriors on enemy forces often exceeds their direct military contribution, as their reputation for extreme violence and their distinctive appearance can cause panic among defenders who might otherwise maintain discipline under fire. The Drukhari have learned to exploit this psychological advantage by deploying witches in situations where their presence will have maximum impact on enemy morale, using them as shock troops to break enemy formations or as terror weapons to prevent the organization of effective resistance. The vehicles that transport Drukhari raiding forces represent some of the most advanced military technology in the galaxy, combining speed, firepower, and stealth capabilities in platforms that can operate effectively in the diverse environments encountered during real space operations. The Raider serves as the primary transport for Drukhari infantry, providing rapid deployment capabilities while offering fire support through its integrated weapon systems. The vehicle's open-top design reflects the Drukhari philosophy of warfare, emphasizing speed and aggression over protection while allowing passengers to engage enemies during transit. The construction of raiders incorporates advanced materials and technologies that allow them to achieve performance levels that would be impossible using conventional engineering approaches. The hull consists of a composite material that combines metallic strength with organic flexibility, creating a structure that can absorb impacts while maintaining structural integrity under extreme stress. The propulsion system utilizes gravitic manipulation technology that allows for three-dimensional movement at speeds that can exceed those of most atmospheric aircraft, while the stealth systems can render the vehicle nearly invisible to most detection methods. The weapon systems integrated into Raider designs provide both anti-personnel and anti-vehicle capabilities, allowing the craft to engage a wide variety of targets while supporting the infantry they transport. The Dark Lance represents the most common heavy weapon installation, providing long-range anti-armor capability that can eliminate enemy vehicles and fortifications before they can respond effectively. The Splinter Cannon offers rapid-fire capability against infantry targets, creating fields of crystalline fragments that can clear enemy positions while generating the suffering necessary for psychic feeding. The crew requirements for Raider operations reflect the vehicle's sophisticated systems and the tactical demands of Drukhari warfare, with each craft requiring a pilot trained in the complex three-dimensional maneuvering necessary for effective combat operations. The pilot positions are among the most coveted assignments within Drukhari military forces, as they offer opportunities for individual glory while providing access to some of the most advanced technology available to their civilization. The training required to become a qualified Raider pilot involves years of intensive instruction in vehicle operation, tactical coordination, and the psychological aspects of terror warfare. The Venom represents a lighter alternative to the Raider, designed for rapid insertion of small units and reconnaissance operations that require maximum speed and stealth. The vehicle's smaller size allows it to operate in environments where larger craft would be impractical, while its advanced sensor systems provide intelligence-gathering capabilities that prove valuable for both tactical and strategic planning. The Venom's weapon systems are optimized for engaging light targets and providing suppressive fire, making it particularly effective in urban environments where precision and mobility are more important than raw firepower. The tactical employment of Venoms during raids typically involves their use as pathfinders and quick-strike units, identifying targets and eliminating key defensive positions before the arrival of heavier forces. The vehicle's speed and maneuverability allow it to exploit gaps in enemy defenses while avoiding prolonged engagements that might result in losses. The crews of Venom craft are trained to operate independently for extended periods, making tactical decisions based on local conditions while maintaining coordination with the overall raiding plan. The support elements that accompany major raiding forces provide specialized capabilities that enhance the effectiveness of the primary combat units while addressing the logistical requirements of extended operations in real space. The Ravager serves as the primary heavy weapons platform for Drukhari forces, mounting multiple Dark Lances or other heavy weapons that can engage enemy armor and fortifications at long range. The vehicle's design emphasizes firepower over protection, following the Drukhari doctrine of eliminating threats before they can respond rather than attempting to withstand enemy attacks. The crew training for Ravager operations focuses on target identification and engagement at extended ranges, requiring skills that differ significantly from those needed for the close-range combat preferred by most Drukhari warriors. The gunners must be capable of precise fire control while operating at high speeds and under combat conditions, coordinating their fire with other units while maintaining the rapid pace of movement that characterizes Drukhari tactics. The most skilled Ravager crews can eliminate multiple targets in rapid succession while maintaining formation with other vehicles, creating devastating barrages that can break enemy formations before they can organize effective resistance. The specialized units that participate in major raids include elements drawn from the homunculus covens, bringing their expertise in biological warfare and prisoner processing to support the overall operation. The grotesques and racks that accompany these forces provide unique capabilities that cannot be replicated by conventional military units, serving as both combat assets and specialized tools for achieving specific objectives. The presence of homunculus elements in a raiding force indicates the operation's importance and the level of resources being committed to its success. The deployment of homunculus forces during raids typically focuses on objectives that require their specialized skills, such as the capture of particularly valuable prisoners or the neutralization of biological defenses that might otherwise impede the operation. The grotesques serve as shock troops capable of breaking through heavily defended positions, while the racks provide technical expertise for dealing with complex systems and extracting information from captured enemies. The coordination between homunculus forces and conventional military units requires careful planning to ensure that their unique capabilities are employed effectively within the overall tactical framework. The target selection process for realspace raids involves detailed analysis of potential objectives to identify those that offer the best combination of strategic value, tactical feasibility, and resource yield. Imperial worlds represent the most common targets due to their widespread distribution and the variety of populations they contain, ranging from the teeming masses of hive cities to the specialized populations of forge worlds and shrine worlds. Each type of Imperial world presents different challenges and opportunities, requiring specialized approaches that take into account their unique characteristics and defensive capabilities. The hive cities of Imperial worlds offer particularly attractive targets for Drukhari raiders due to their massive populations and the social stratification that creates different types of victims within a single location. The underhive populations provide large numbers of expendable slaves, while the upper levels contain nobles and officials whose suffering generates higher quality psychic energy. The complex urban environment of a hive city also provides numerous opportunities for the terror tactics that are central to Drukhari warfare, allowing raiding forces to create maximum psychological impact through selective targeting of key infrastructure and population centers. The defensive capabilities of Imperial worlds vary significantly based on their strategic importance and the resources available to their governors, ranging from minimal PDF forces on frontier worlds to the sophisticated defenses of forge worlds and fortress worlds. The Drukhari intelligence networks provide detailed assessments of these defensive capabilities, allowing raid planners to select targets that can be overwhelmed by the forces available while avoiding locations where the defenders might inflict unacceptable losses on the attacking forces. The timing of raids against Imperial targets takes into account factors such as local military deployments, seasonal variations in population density, and political conditions that might affect the response to an attack. The most successful raids are those that strike when local defenses are at their weakest, such as during shift changes in military units or during festivals and celebrations when civilian populations are concentrated in predictable locations. The Drukhari have developed sophisticated models for predicting these optimal timing windows, using historical data and ongoing intelligence to identify the moments when their attacks will achieve maximum effect. The craftworld Eldar represent a different category of target that requires specialized approaches due to their advanced technology and psychic capabilities. These operations are typically conducted by elite forces drawn from the most experienced cabals, as the risks involved in attacking fellow Eldar are significantly higher than those associated with raids against other species. The motivation for such attacks often involves the acquisition of specific resources or technologies that cannot be obtained through conventional raiding, making these operations strategic investments rather than routine predation. The defensive capabilities of craftworld Eldar include not only their advanced weapons and vehicles, but also their psychic abilities and their deep understanding of Drukhari tactics and motivations. This knowledge makes them particularly difficult targets, as they can anticipate and counter many of the standard approaches used in raids against other species. The Drukhari forces assigned to such operations must be prepared for prolonged engagements and sophisticated countermeasures that can neutralize many of their usual advantages. The psychological aspects of raids against Craftworld Eldari differ significantly from those involving other species, as the shared heritage between the two groups creates complex emotional dynamics that can be exploited by skilled commanders. The Drukhari often attempt to use their cousins' moral constraints against them, creating situations where the Craftworld Eldari must choose between protecting innocent lives and achieving military objectives. These tactics can prove highly effective in disrupting enemy coordination while providing the psychological satisfaction that many Drukhari derive from corrupting their more virtuous kin. The Orc territories scattered throughout the galaxy present unique challenges and opportunities for Drukhari raiders, as the chaotic nature of Orc society creates both vulnerabilities that can be exploited and unpredictable responses that can complicate operational planning. The Orcs' love of violence and their tendency toward disorganized but enthusiastic resistance make them dangerous opponents who can inflict significant casualties on unprepared attackers. However, their lack of sophisticated defensive systems and their predictable response patterns make them vulnerable to the speed and precision that characterize Drukhari warfare. The value of Orc populations as sources of slaves and psychic energy is limited by their biological characteristics and psychological makeup, as their simple minds and high pain tolerance reduce the effectiveness of conventional torture techniques. However, the Orcs' natural aggression and their capacity for generating violence make them valuable for specialized applications, particularly in arena combat, where their enthusiasm for fighting can provide entertainment for Drukhari audiences. The selection of Orc targets typically focuses on locations where large numbers can be captured with minimal effort, such as during the confusion following major battles between different Orc factions. The tactical approaches used against Orc targets emphasize speed and overwhelming force, as prolonged engagements allow the Orcs to organize their naturally chaotic society into more effective resistance. The Drukhari prefer to strike during periods of internal conflict, when Orc attention is focused on fighting among themselves, using the confusion to achieve their objectives before the Greenskins can respond effectively. The unpredictable nature of Orc responses requires raiding forces to maintain flexibility in their planning, while being prepared for situations that deviate significantly from expected patterns. The Tau Empire presents an entirely different set of challenges for Drukhari raiders, as their technological sophistication and systematic approach to warfare create defensive networks that can detect and respond to incursions with remarkable efficiency. The Tau's use of advanced sensor arrays and coordinated fire support makes the stealth approaches favored by many Drukhari forces significantly more difficult to execute successfully. However, the relatively young nature of the Tau Empire means that they lack the millennia of experience in dealing with Drukhari tactics that characterizes older civilizations, creating opportunities for raiders who can adapt their methods to exploit this inexperience. The psychological warfare techniques that prove so effective against human populations have limited impact on Tau forces, as their philosophy of the greater good provides them with mental resilience that allows them to maintain discipline even under extreme stress. The Drukhari have learned to focus their terror tactics on the human auxiliary forces that serve alongside Tau military units, using the suffering of these allies to disrupt Tau coordination while providing the psychic nourishment that sustains the raiding forces. The multi-species nature of Tau society creates additional opportunities for exploitation, as different member races respond differently to various forms of psychological pressure. The advanced technology employed by Tau forces requires specialized countermeasures that push Drukhari stealth and jamming systems to their limits. The pulse weapons favored by Tau infantry can penetrate many forms of personal armor, while their battlesuit technology provides individual warriors with capabilities that rival those of light vehicles. The Drukhari response has involved the development of new tactics that emphasize rapid engagement at close range, where their superior speed and agility can overcome the Tau's technological advantages before the enemy can bring their firepower to bear effectively. The expansion of the Tau Empire has created numerous frontier worlds that offer attractive targets for Drukhari raiders, as these locations often possess significant populations while maintaining relatively light defensive forces. The Tau's systematic approach to planetary development means that these worlds typically contain well-organized population centers that can be efficiently raided, though the standardized nature of Tau defensive installations requires careful intelligence gathering to identify vulnerabilities that can be exploited during an attack. The coordination required for successful realspace raids extends far beyond the tactical level to encompass complex logistical and political arrangements that must be negotiated between the various factions participating in each operation. The temporary alliances formed for major raids often involve multiple cabals working together despite their normal rivalries, requiring careful diplomatic maneuvering to ensure that competing interests do not undermine the mission's success. These negotiations can take months to complete, as each faction seeks to maximize their share of the anticipated rewards while minimizing their exposure to risk. The division of responsibilities during multi-faction raids follows protocols that have evolved over millennia of cooperative operations, with different organizations taking charge of specific aspects of the mission based on their particular strengths and capabilities. The cabals typically assume responsibility for the primary military objectives, using their disciplined forces and heavy weapons to secure key targets and eliminate organized resistance. The witch cults focus on crowd control and the generation of terror among civilian populations, using their spectacular combat abilities to create the psychological conditions necessary for effective slave-taking operations. The homunculus covens provide specialized support services that enhance the effectiveness of the conventional military forces while pursuing their own research objectives through the acquisition of specimens and the testing of new biological weapons. Their participation in major raids often involves the deployment of experimental creatures and devices that have not been used in previous operations, turning each mission into a field test for new technologies and techniques. The data gathered during these operations contributes to ongoing research efforts while providing immediate tactical advantages that can prove decisive in achieving mission objectives. The command structure for multi-faction raids requires the establishment of temporary hierarchies that can coordinate the activities of forces with different training, equipment, and operational philosophies. The overall command is typically assigned to the Archon, whose cabal is contributing the largest number of forces to the operation, though this arrangement is subject to negotiation and can change based on the specific requirements of each mission. The complexity of these command arrangements reflects the competitive nature of Drukhari society, where cooperation is always temporary and based on mutual benefit rather than genuine trust. The intelligence networks that support realspace raids extend throughout the galaxy, maintained by a combination of permanent agents, temporary infiltrators, and purchased information from various sources. The most valuable intelligence comes from long-term agents who have established themselves within target societies and can provide detailed information about defensive capabilities, population movements, and political conditions that might affect the success of an operation. These agents often operate for decades without contact from their Drukhari masters, using their positions to gather information while waiting for the opportunity to contribute to a major raid. The recruitment and training of intelligence agents requires specialized skills that differ significantly from those needed for conventional military operations. Successful agents must be capable of blending into alien societies while maintaining their loyalty to Commorragh despite years of isolation from their own culture. The psychological pressures involved in this type of work have led to the development of specialized conditioning techniques that help agents maintain their sanity and effectiveness during extended deployments in hostile environments. The communication systems used to coordinate intelligence operations across galactic distances rely on a combination of Webway message routes and more conventional methods that can operate without revealing the agent's true loyalties. The most sensitive information is transmitted through coded messages that appear to be routine commercial communications, while emergency situations may require the use of more direct but riskier communication methods. The security of these communication networks is maintained through constant monitoring and periodic changes to codes and procedures that prevent enemy forces from intercepting and decoding Drukhari intelligence. The analysis and distribution of intelligence within Commorragh involves multiple layers of evaluation and verification to ensure that the information reaching raid planners is accurate and current. The intelligence services maintained by different factions often compete with each other for access to the most valuable information, creating internal markets where intelligence is bought and sold like any other commodity. This competitive environment helps ensure the quality of information while providing incentives for agents to develop new sources and methods for gathering data about potential targets. The execution phase of realspace raids begins with the deployment of reconnaissance forces that confirm the accuracy of intelligence reports while identifying any changes in target conditions that might affect the success of the main operation. These advanced elements typically consist of small units equipped with advanced stealth systems and specialized sensors that can operate undetected in enemy territory for extended periods. The information they gather during these preliminary operations is used to make final adjustments to the raid plan while providing early warning of any unexpected defensive preparations that might compromise the mission. The timing of the main assault is coordinated to achieve maximum surprise while taking advantage of any temporary vulnerabilities identified by the reconnaissance forces. The Drukhari preference for dawn attacks reflects their understanding of human circadian rhythms and the reduced alertness that characterizes most species during the early morning hours. However, the specific timing of each raid is adjusted based on local conditions and the particular characteristics of the target population, with some operations scheduled to coincide with religious festivals or other events that concentrate large numbers of potential victims in predictable locations. The initial assault phase emphasizes speed and shock value, with multiple strike forces hitting different objectives simultaneously to prevent the coordination of effective resistance. The use of Webway portals allows Drukhari forces to appear directly within enemy territory without warning, bypassing perimeter defenses and striking at the heart of target installations before defenders can respond. The psychological impact of these sudden appearances is carefully calculated to maximize terror and confusion among the target population while demonstrating the futility of resistance. The weapons and tactics employed during the initial assault are selected to create maximum psychological impact while achieving specific military objectives. The use of pain-inducing weapons serves both practical and psychological purposes, incapacitating enemies while generating the suffering necessary for psychic feeding. The spectacular nature of many Drukhari weapons creates visual and auditory effects that enhance the terror experienced by witnesses while providing entertainment for the attacking forces who appreciate the artistry involved in well-executed violence. The capture and processing of prisoners during raids requires specialized techniques and equipment that allow for the efficient collection and transportation of large numbers of captives. The Drukhari have developed standardized procedures for prisoner handling that maximize the number of victims that can be taken while minimizing the resources required for their capture and containment. These procedures include the use of neural dampeners that prevent resistance without causing permanent damage, portable containment systems that can hold multiple prisoners in minimal space, and psychological conditioning techniques that break down the will to escape. The selection criteria for prisoners reflect the diverse needs of Drukhari society, with different types of captives being designated for specific purposes based on their physical characteristics, psychological profiles, and potential value as sources of psychic energy. The most physically robust specimens are typically reserved for arena combat or heavy labor, while those with specialized skills or knowledge may be assigned to technical roles within Commorragh's infrastructure. The individuals who show the greatest capacity for generating psychic energy through their suffering are reserved for the torture chambers and feeding halls that sustain the city's population. The transportation of captured prisoners from raid sites back to Commorragh involves the use of specialized slave ships that can hold thousands of captives while maintaining the conditions necessary for their survival during the journey through the Webway. These vessels incorporate life support systems that provide minimal sustenance while preventing escape attempts, along with monitoring equipment that tracks the physical and psychological condition of the cargo. The design of slave ships reflects the Drukhari understanding of the relationship between prisoner condition and the quality of suffering they can generate, with systems that maintain captives in states of fear and despair without allowing them to succumb to complete hopelessness. The economic aspects of realspace raids extend beyond simple slave taking to encompass the acquisition of resources, technology, and information that can be traded within Commorragh's markets or used to enhance the capabilities of the participating factions. The most valuable non-human resources include rare materials needed for weapon construction, technological components that can be reverse engineered or incorporated into Drukhari systems, and cultural artifacts that provide insights into the psychology and capabilities of potential future targets. The distribution of raid proceeds among participating factions follows complex formulas that take into account the contributions made by each organization while reflecting the political relationships between different groups. The negotiations surrounding these distributions can be as complex as those involved in planning the raids themselves, with each faction seeking to maximize their share of the rewards while maintaining the relationships necessary for future cooperation. The most successful archons and succubi are those who can navigate these negotiations effectively while building reputations that attract allies for future operations. The long-term strategic impact of realspace raids extends beyond their immediate tactical objectives to influence the broader balance of power within the galaxy. The systematic predation conducted by Drukhari forces creates zones of instability that can be exploited by other factions, while the terror generated by their attacks influences the defensive preparations and resource allocation decisions of potential targets. The cumulative effect of decades of raiding activity has shaped the development of entire sectors, creating patterns of settlement and military deployment that reflect the ongoing threat posed by the Dark City's inhabitants. The psychological warfare aspects of Drukhari raids have proven particularly effective against human populations, whose emotional responses and cultural values make them vulnerable to the terror tactics that form a central component of Drukhari military doctrine. The systematic use of torture and mutilation serves not only to generate psychic energy for the raiders, but also to create lasting trauma among survivor populations that can persist for generations. These psychological scars influence the behavior of entire communities, creating cultures of fear that make future raids easier to execute while providing ongoing sources of terror that can be harvested during subsequent operations. The adaptation of raid tactics to counter evolving defensive measures represents an ongoing challenge that requires constant innovation and flexibility from Drukhari military planners. The galaxy's various civilizations have developed increasingly sophisticated countermeasures to Drukhari attacks, including early warning systems, rapid response forces, and specialized weapons designed to counter the speed and stealth advantages that characterize Dark City military forces. The Drukhari response has involved the development of new technologies and tactics that can overcome these defensive measures while maintaining the speed and surprise that are essential to their operational philosophy. The technological arms race between the Drukhari and their victims has driven innovation on both sides, with each successful defensive measure prompting the development of new offensive capabilities that can overcome the improved defenses. The Drukhari's access to advanced Eldari technology provides them with advantages that most of their enemies cannot match, but the numerical superiority of their opponents means that even small improvements in defensive capabilities can significantly impact the success rates of raiding operations. This dynamic has led to the development of increasingly specialized raid forces that are equipped and trained to deal with specific types of defensive systems and enemy responses, creating a perpetual cycle of adaptation that shapes the nature of warfare throughout the galaxy. The Imperium of Man stands as the most persistent and dangerous adversary faced by the Drukhari, representing a civilization whose vast resources and fanatical dedication to warfare create challenges that extend far beyond simple military considerations. The sheer scale of Imperial forces means that even successful raids against Imperial targets inevitably provoke responses that can threaten Drukhari interests across multiple sectors. The Adeptus Astartes in particular pose significant threats to raiding operations, as their enhanced capabilities and tactical doctrine make them capable of inflicting severe casualties on Drukhari forces that rely on speed and surprise rather than sustained combat effectiveness. The Imperial Guard regiments stationed throughout the galaxy have developed increasingly sophisticated anti-raiding protocols that reflect decades of bitter experience with Drukhari attacks. These defensive measures include rapid deployment forces equipped with high-mobility vehicles, communication networks that can coordinate responses across planetary distances, and specialized weapons designed to counter the stealth systems employed by Dark City raiders. The most effective Imperial commanders have learned to anticipate Drukhari tactics and prepare countermeasures that can disrupt raiding operations before they achieve their objectives. The Adeptus Mechanicus Forge worlds present particular challenges due to their advanced defensive systems and the technological sophistication of their military forces. The Tech Priest's understanding of Imperial technology allows them to develop countermeasures that can neutralize many of the advantages typically enjoyed by Drukhari raiders, while their cybernetic enhancements make them less susceptible to the psychological warfare tactics that prove so effective against normal human populations. The servitor forces employed by the Mechanicus also present unique challenges, as their programmed responses and lack of fear make them difficult to intimidate or manipulate through conventional terror tactics. The Ecclesiarchy worlds scattered throughout Imperial space offer attractive targets due to their large populations and the emotional intensity generated by religious fervor, but they also present significant risks due to the fanatical resistance typically encountered during attacks on sacred sites. The Sisters of Battle, who guard many shrine worlds, possess combat capabilities that rival those of Space Marines, while their absolute faith provides them with psychological resilience that makes them nearly immune to Drukhari terror tactics. The civilian populations on these worlds often display similar levels of fanatical resistance, choosing death over capture in ways that reduce the effectiveness of slave-taking operations. The relationship between the Drukhari and their Craftworld cousins represents one of the most complex and emotionally charged aspects of their interactions with other Eldari factions. The shared heritage between these two branches of the Eldari species creates bonds that transcend their fundamental philosophical differences, yet these same connections generate levels of hatred and contempt that exceed the simple enmity shown toward other species. The Drukhari view their Craftworld kin as cowards who have abandoned their true nature in favor of artificial constraints and spiritual weakness, while the Craftworld Eldari see the Drukhari as living reminders of the corruption that led to their species' downfall. The military capabilities of Craftworld forces present unique challenges for Drukhari raiders, as their advanced technology and psychic abilities create defensive advantages that cannot be overcome through conventional tactics. The Farseers who guide Craftworld military operations can often predict Drukhari attacks before they occur, allowing defenders to prepare countermeasures and position forces to maximum advantage. The Aspect Warriors, who form the backbone of Craftworld military forces, possess combat skills that rival those of the most elite Drukhari fighters, while their specialized equipment and training make them formidable opponents in any tactical situation. The psychological warfare conducted between Drukhari and Craftworld forces operates on levels that would be incomprehensible to other species, involving subtle manipulations of shared cultural memories and deliberate provocations designed to exploit the emotional vulnerabilities created by their common heritage. The Drukhari often attempt to corrupt or capture prominent craftworld figures, using their suffering to demonstrate the futility of the path system while providing particularly potent sources of psychic nourishment. The craftworld Eldari respond with their own forms of psychological warfare, using their moral authority and spiritual discipline to highlight the degradation that defines Drukhari existence. The occasional alliances formed between Drukhari and craftworld forces represent temporary arrangements born of mutual necessity rather than genuine cooperation, typically occurring when both factions face threats that exceed their individual capabilities to address. These alliances are characterized by extreme mistrust and constant maneuvering for advantage, with both sides seeking to maximize their benefits while minimizing their exposure to betrayal by their supposed allies. The knowledge and capabilities that each faction brings to such partnerships can prove decisive in achieving shared objectives, but the fundamental incompatibility of their worldviews ensures that cooperation remains limited and temporary. The Harlequins occupy a unique position in the complex relationships between different Eldari factions, serving as intermediaries who can move freely between Craftworld and Drukhari territories while pursuing their own mysterious agenda. The Drukhari maintain an uneasy respect for these enigmatic performers, recognizing their combat capabilities and their access to information that can prove valuable for planning future operations. The Harlequins' ability to appear and disappear at will makes them valuable allies when their interests align with Drukhari objectives, but their unpredictable nature and loyalty to their own cause make them unreliable partners for long-term planning. The forces of chaos present both opportunities and threats to Drukhari interests, as their chaotic nature creates situations that can be exploited, while their supernatural abilities pose risks that conventional military planning cannot adequately address. The Chaos Space Marines who serve the ruinous powers possess combat capabilities that exceed those of their loyalist counterparts, enhanced by demonic gifts and millennia of experience in warfare that spans both real space and the warp. Their unpredictable tactics and willingness to employ forbidden weapons make them dangerous opponents who can inflict severe casualties on Drukhari forces that underestimate their capabilities. The cultist forces that serve Chaos warbands offer attractive targets for slave raids due to their large numbers and the psychological conditioning that makes them particularly responsive to terror tactics. However, the demonic influences that affect many Chaos-controlled worlds create environmental hazards that can threaten Drukhari raiders who lack adequate protection against warp-based phenomena. The unpredictable nature of Chaos corruption means that even successful raids against such targets can result in contamination that affects raiding forces long after they return to Commorragh. The particular enmity between the Drukhari and followers of Slaanesh stems from their competing claims on Eldari souls and the fundamental threat that the Prince of Pleasure represents to Drukhari survival. The Emperor's children and other Slaanesh-aligned forces actively seek to capture Drukhari for use in their own twisted rituals, viewing them as particularly valuable prizes due to their connection to the Chaos god they serve. These conflicts often escalate beyond simple military engagements to become spiritual battles, where the stakes extend far beyond territorial control or resource acquisition. The demon forces that serve Slaanesh pose existential threats to any Drukhari who encounter them, as their very presence can strengthen the spiritual bonds that tie the Dark City's inhabitants to their greatest enemy. The Keepers of Secrets and other greater demons of Slaanesh possess abilities that can overwhelm the spiritual defenses that allow Drukhari to resist their curse, potentially claiming souls that have evaded capture for millennia. The lesser demons that serve the Prince of Pleasure present different but equally serious threats, using their seductive abilities and promises of release from suffering to corrupt Drukhari who lack the discipline necessary to resist their influence. The Orc Wayags that periodically sweep across the galaxy create opportunities for Drukhari raiders to exploit the chaos and destruction left in their wake, but they also present challenges due to the unpredictable nature of greenskin warfare and their tendency to fight with suicidal enthusiasm. The orcs' love of violence means that they often welcome Drukhari attacks as opportunities for enjoyable combat, making them less susceptible to the terror tactics that prove so effective against other species. Their crude but effective technology can pose unexpected threats to Drukhari vehicles and equipment, while their numerical superiority can overwhelm raiding forces that become trapped in prolonged engagements. The warbosses who lead major orc forces possess cunning that belies their brutish appearance, often developing tactics that can counter Drukhari advantages through sheer audacity and willingness to accept massive casualties in pursuit of their objectives. The most successful orc leaders have learned to anticipate Drukhari hit and run tactics and prepare countermeasures that can trap raiding forces in disadvantageous positions. The speed freaks and other specialized orc units can match Drukhari vehicles for speed and aggression, creating tactical situations where the traditional advantages enjoyed by Dark City forces are significantly reduced. The Tyranid hive fleets represent an entirely different category of threat that challenges fundamental assumptions about warfare and survival that underlie Drukhari tactical doctrine. The complete absence of individual consciousness within Tyranid organisms makes them immune to psychological warfare tactics, while their biological nature creates environmental hazards that can persist long after military engagements have concluded. The synapse creatures that coordinate Tyranid forces possess alien intelligences that operate according to principles that Drukhari strategists find difficult to predict or counter. The consumption of entire worlds by Tyranid swarms eliminates potential raiding targets while creating refugee populations that can be exploited by opportunistic Drukhari forces. However, the biological contamination left behind by Tyranid invasions makes many of these refugee populations unsuitable for conventional slave-taking operations, as their exposure to Tyranid organisms can create health hazards that threaten the stability of Commorragh's population. The adaptive nature of Tyranid evolution means that successful tactics employed against one hive fleet may prove ineffective against subsequent encounters with different swarms. The Necron tomb worlds scattered throughout the galaxy present unique challenges due to their advanced technology and the inhuman nature of their robotic inhabitants. The Necron warriors and other constructs that guard these ancient sites possess capabilities that can match or exceed those of Drukhari equipment, while their lack of biological needs makes them immune to many of the weapons and tactics that prove effective against living opponents. The temporal manipulation technologies employed by some Necron forces can disrupt the carefully timed operations that characterize Drukhari warfare, creating tactical situations where speed and surprise provide no advantage. The awakening of Necron tomb complexes often creates power vacuums that can be exploited by Drukhari raiders seeking to capture populations fleeing from these ancient threats. However, the advanced defensive systems that protect Necron territories make direct confrontation extremely hazardous, while the alien nature of Necron technology makes it difficult to predict their responses to conventional raiding tactics. The most successful operations against Necron-controlled territories involve indirect approaches that avoid direct confrontation while exploiting the chaos created by their awakening to achieve specific objectives. The Tau Empire's expansion into territories previously controlled by other factions creates opportunities for Drukhari forces to exploit the instability that accompanies these transitions. The Tau's systematic approach to planetary conquest often leaves behind populations that are in various stages of integration into their empire, creating targets that possess the advantages of Tau technology while lacking the full defensive capabilities of established Tau worlds. The multi-species nature of the Tau Empire also creates opportunities for psychological warfare that exploits the tensions between different member races. The Fire Caste warriors, who form the backbone of Tau military forces, possess advanced equipment and tactical training that make them formidable opponents in conventional engagements. However, their reliance on technology and coordinated tactics creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited by Drukhari forces that can disrupt their communication networks or separate individual units from their support systems. The ethereals who provide political and spiritual leadership to Tau forces represent particularly valuable targets, as their capture or elimination can create confusion and demoralization that extends far beyond their immediate military value. The temporary alliances that occasionally form between Drukhari factions and other galactic powers reflect the pragmatic nature of Dark City politics and the willingness of their leaders to cooperate with any faction that can provide advantages in pursuing their objectives. These arrangements typically involve the exchange of services rather than genuine cooperation, with the Drukhari providing military capabilities or specialized knowledge in return for access to resources or information that supports their own goals. The most common forms of cooperation involve mercenary contracts where Drukhari forces provide combat support in exchange for payment in slaves, exotic materials, or intelligence about potential targets. The rogue trader dynasties that operate on the fringes of imperial space represent natural partners for certain types of Drukhari operations, as their independence from imperial authority and their focus on profit over ideology make them willing to overlook the methods employed by their Dark City allies. These partnerships often involve the sharing of intelligence about imperial defensive preparations and the coordination of operations that benefit both parties, while maintaining plausible deniability about the extent of their cooperation. The most successful arrangements involve long-term relationships that span multiple generations of both human and Drukhari leadership. The pirate fleets and mercenary companies that operate throughout the galaxy provide additional opportunities for cooperation that can benefit Drukhari interests, while providing these groups with access to advanced technology and combat expertise. These relationships are typically limited in scope and duration, focusing on specific operations or objectives rather than long-term strategic partnerships. The criminal networks that support these activities often serve as sources of intelligence and logistical support that enhance the effectiveness of Drukhari operations, while providing their partners with access to markets and resources that would otherwise be unavailable. The Chaos Warbands that operate independently of the major legions sometimes find common cause with Drukhari forces when their objectives align, particularly in operations directed against Imperial targets or Craftworld Eldari forces. These alliances are characterized by extreme mistrust and constant vigilance against betrayal, as both sides recognize that their fundamental goals remain incompatible despite temporary shared interests. The supernatural abilities possessed by many Chaos forces can complement Drukhari capabilities in ways that create synergistic effects, but the unpredictable nature of Chaos corruption makes these partnerships extremely hazardous for all involved. The machinations of countless Drukhari across 10 millennia of predation have produced individuals whose names echo through the twisted spires of Commorragh with a mixture of reverence and terror. These legendary figures represent the apex of their species' capacity for cruelty, cunning, and survival, having carved their reputations through deeds that would horrify even the most hardened warriors of other races. Their stories serve as both inspiration and warning to those who would follow in their footsteps, demonstrating the heights that can be achieved through absolute dedication to the principles that govern Dark City society, while illustrating the terrible prices that such success demands. Among these dark luminaries, none commands greater respect or fear than Asdrubal Vecht, the supreme overlord of Commorragh and undisputed master of the cabal of the Black Heart. His rise from the depths of slavery to absolute power represents one of the most remarkable transformations in galactic history, a journey that spans millennia and encompasses schemes of such complexity that their full scope may never be completely understood. Vecht's story begins in the lowest levels of Commorragh's social hierarchy, where he served as a mere slave within the very organization he would eventually come to rule through a combination of patience, intelligence, and ruthlessness that has never been equaled. The circumstances of Vecht's birth remain shrouded in mystery, though most accounts suggest that he was born into slavery during the early millennia following Commorragh's establishment. The social structures of ancient Drukhari society made advancement from such humble origins virtually impossible, as the rigid hierarchies that governed their civilization were designed to maintain existing power relationships while preventing the emergence of threats to established authority. The fact that Vect not only escaped these constraints, but ultimately transcended them, entirely speaks to capabilities that exceed even the extraordinary standards typical of his species. Vect's early years as a slave provided him with insights into the fundamental weaknesses of Drukhari society that would prove invaluable during his later rise to power. His position at the bottom of the social hierarchy allowed him to observe the behavior of his supposed superiors without being perceived as a threat, while his intelligence and cunning enabled him to identify patterns and vulnerabilities that escaped the notice of those who considered themselves his betters. The systematic humiliation and abuse that characterized his early existence forged a personality capable of enduring any hardship while maintaining focus on long-term objectives that might take centuries to achieve. The initial phases of Vect's rise involved the careful cultivation of relationships with other slaves and low-ranking members of the Cabal hierarchy, building networks of loyalty and obligation that would serve as the foundation for more ambitious schemes. His natural charisma and strategic thinking attracted followers who recognized his potential even when his circumstances suggested nothing but continued servitude. These early alliances were maintained through a combination of shared benefits and carefully applied pressure, creating bonds that could survive the tests of time and changing circumstances that would destroy less carefully constructed relationships. Vect's first significant breakthrough came through his manipulation of conflicts between different factions within the Cabal of the Black Heart, using his knowledge of their weaknesses to orchestrate situations where his supposed superiors would eliminate each other while advancing his own position. These early schemes demonstrated the patience and long-term thinking that would characterize his entire career, as he was willing to wait decades for the perfect opportunity to strike while maintaining the appearance of loyal servitude that prevented his targets from recognizing the threat he represented. The transformation from slave to sybarite required Vect to demonstrate combat prowess and tactical acumen that would convince his superiors of his value while concealing the true extent of his ambitions. His participation in numerous raids against realspace targets provided opportunities to showcase abilities that had been hidden during his years of servitude, while his success in these operations generated the resources and reputation necessary for continued advancement. The careful balance between demonstrating competence and avoiding excessive attention required skills that few individuals possess, as any misstep could have resulted in elimination by rivals who feared his growing influence. Vect's promotion to Draken marked the beginning of a new phase in his rise to power, as this position provided him with the authority and resources necessary to implement more sophisticated schemes while maintaining the networks of loyalty that had sustained him through his earlier struggles. His management of the forces under his command demonstrated leadership abilities that exceeded those of his nominal superiors, while his success in military operations generated wealth and prestige that could be used to further his political objectives. The combination of military competence and political cunning made him a valuable asset to the Cabal's leadership, while positioning him as a potential successor to those who currently held power. The elimination of Vect's rivals within the Cabal hierarchy occurred through a series of carefully orchestrated events that appeared to be the result of natural political evolution rather than deliberate manipulation. His targets found themselves isolated from their traditional allies and exposed to enemies who had previously been held in check by the balance of power that Vect had systematically undermined. The apparent coincidences that led to their downfall were actually the result of decades of preparation and positioning that ensured each elimination would appear to be the inevitable consequence of their own mistakes and weaknesses. The final phase of Vect's rise to supreme power within the Cabal of the Black Heart involved the orchestration of events that would eliminate the last obstacles to his ascension, while demonstrating his worthiness to rule through achievements that could not be attributed to luck or circumstance. His successful navigation of a major crisis that threatened the Cabal's existence provided the opportunity to showcase leadership abilities that convinced even his most skeptical subordinates of his superiority to the previous leadership. The transition of power was accomplished with such skill that it appeared to be a natural evolution rather than the culmination of a millennia-long conspiracy. Vex's reign as Supreme Overlord has been characterized by an expansion of Drukhari power and influence that has made Commorragh the dominant force within the Webway, while establishing new standards for the systematic exploitation of realspace civilizations. His strategic vision encompasses not merely the immediate needs of his own organization, but the long-term development of Drukhari society as a whole, creating policies and initiatives that strengthen their civilization while maintaining the competitive dynamics that drive innovation and excellence. The balance between cooperation and competition that characterizes his rule reflects an understanding of Drukhari psychology that allows him to channel their natural tendencies toward constructive purposes. The military campaigns conducted under Vex's leadership have achieved successes that exceed even the impressive standards established by previous generations of Drukhari raiders, incorporating innovations in tactics, technology, and strategic planning that have revolutionized their approach to warfare. His personal involvement in major operations demonstrates combat skills that rival those of the greatest warriors in Drukhari history, while his strategic planning abilities have enabled the coordination of multi-faction operations on scales that were previously impossible to achieve. The combination of personal prowess and organizational genius has made him a figure of legend whose reputation extends far beyond the boundaries of Commorragh. Lady Molly's of the Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue represents a different but equally formidable approach to achieving power within Drukhari society, having built her influence through mastery of prophecy and divination that allows her to anticipate and shape future events with uncanny accuracy. Her rise to prominence began with the demonstration of psychic abilities that exceeded the normal capabilities of her species, talents that she enhanced through dark pacts and forbidden rituals that granted her access to knowledge that spans past, present, and future. The price paid for these abilities remains a closely guarded secret, though the physical and spiritual modifications that accompany her powers suggest sacrifices that would horrify even other Drukhari. The prophetic visions that guide Lady Molly's provide her with advantages that transcend normal strategic planning, allowing her to position her forces and resources in ways that anticipate enemy actions, while avoiding threats that would destroy less prescient leaders. Her predictions have achieved such remarkable accuracy that other archons seek her counsel, despite the risks involved in revealing their plans to a potential rival. The information she provides is always valuable, but never complete, requiring those who seek her guidance to make their own interpretations, while remaining dependent on her continued cooperation for future insights. The Cabal of the Poisoned Tongue has developed under Lady Molly's leadership into an organization that specializes in the subtle arts of assassination and psychological warfare, employing techniques that reflect their leader's preference for achieving objectives through precision and timing rather than brute force. The warriors of her Cabal are trained in methods that emphasize stealth and the use of exotic toxins that can eliminate targets without leaving evidence of their involvement. The reputation for subtlety that characterizes the organization has made them valuable allies for operations that require discretion, while establishing them as dangerous enemies whose retaliation might not be immediately apparent. The exotic toxins developed by the Poisoned Tongue's alchemists represent some of the most sophisticated biochemical weapons in existence, incorporating compounds that can target specific genetic markers while producing effects that range from immediate death to prolonged suffering that can last for years. The creation of these substances requires knowledge that combines advanced chemistry with supernatural insights that allow for the manipulation of biological processes in ways that conventional science cannot explain. The most potent toxins are said to affect not only the physical body, but also the victim's soul, creating wounds that persist beyond death and can influence the fate of the spirit in the afterlife. Lady Molly's physical appearance reflects the prices paid for her supernatural abilities, with modifications that blur the line between enhancement and mutation, while creating a presence that commands attention and respect from all who encounter her. Her eyes have been replaced with crystalline orbs that can perceive events across vast distances of space and time, while her hands have been modified to incorporate neural interfaces that allow direct connection to the prophetic matrices that channel her visions. The combination of technological augmentation and supernatural transformation has created an individual whose very presence seems to distort reality around her. The court that surrounds Lady Molly's consists of individuals who have been selected for their complementary abilities and their loyalty to her vision of Drukhari supremacy, creating an organization that functions with precision and coordination that rivals the most disciplined military units. The members of her inner circle have undergone their own modifications and enhancements that allow them to serve specific functions within her schemes, while maintaining the independence necessary for creative thinking and adaptation to changing circumstances. The loyalty that binds these individuals to their leader goes beyond simple fear or ambition to encompass genuine respect for her abilities and dedication to the goals they share. Lelith Hesperax stands as the greatest of all succubi and the undefeated champion of the witch cults, a warrior whose combat abilities have achieved legendary status even among a species renowned for their martial prowess. Her mastery of close combat techniques exceeds that of any other individual in Commorragh's history, combining natural talent with millennia of training and experience that have refined her skills to levels that approach supernatural perfection. The grace and precision that characterize her fighting style have elevated combat to an art form that inspires devotion among spectators while striking terror into the hearts of potential opponents. Hesperax's rise to prominence began in the arena combats that serve as both entertainment and religious expression within witch cult society, where her natural abilities quickly distinguished her from other gladiators who possessed similar training and equipment. Her early victories were achieved through a combination of speed and technique that allowed her to defeat opponents without sustaining significant injuries, a pattern that continued throughout her career and contributed to her reputation for invincibility. The psychological impact of facing an opponent who had never been defeated created additional advantages that she exploited with the same precision that characterized her physical techniques. The weapons favored by Lelith Hesperax reflect her philosophy of combat as artistic expression, emphasizing elegance and precision over raw destructive power while maintaining the lethality necessary for survival in the brutal environment of the arenas. Her signature impaler and shardnik combination allows for a fighting style that emphasizes control and manipulation of the combat environment, creating opportunities to demonstrate superior technique while prolonging encounters to maximize their entertainment value. The modifications made to her equipment reflect personal preferences developed through centuries of experience, creating weapons that respond to her intentions with perfect precision. The training regimens that maintain Hesperax's combat effectiveness represent the pinnacle of witch cult methodology, incorporating techniques that push the boundaries of what is possible within the constraints of biological limitation, while maintaining the flexibility and creativity that distinguish true artistry from mere technical competence. Her daily practice sessions have become legendary among the witch cults, with observers noting that she continues to develop new techniques and approaches despite having already achieved apparent perfection in her chosen discipline. The dedication required to maintain such standards of excellence provides inspiration for younger warriors while establishing benchmarks that few will ever approach. The influence that Lelith Hesperax exercises within the witch cults extends far beyond her personal combat achievements to encompass leadership of cultural and philosophical movements that shape the development of their society. Her interpretation of combat as spiritual expression has influenced training methods and competitive formats throughout Commorragh, while her personal example has inspired countless individuals to pursue their own paths toward martial excellence. The respect that she commands from other succubi reflects not only her undefeated record, but also her contributions to the advancement of their shared culture and values. The arena performances that have established Hesperax's reputation represent more than simple displays of combat skill, incorporating elements of theater and dance that elevate violence to the level of high art, while providing spiritual nourishment for audiences who appreciate the aesthetic dimensions of skillfully executed combat. Her ability to choreograph encounters that maximize both entertainment value and psychic energy generation has made her performances among the most sought-after events in Commorragh's social calendar. The combination of technical mastery and artistic vision that characterizes these displays has established new standards for arena combat that influence the development of the entire witch cult movement. Urian Rakarth represents the ultimate expression of homunculus flesh crafting mastery, an ancient being whose surgical skills and biological knowledge have achieved legendary status even among practitioners who are themselves masters of their grotesque craft. His laboratories contain specimens and experiments that push the boundaries of what is possible within the constraints of biological science, while his personal modifications have transformed him into something that transcends the normal limitations of Eldari physiology. The innovations developed through his research have influenced the development of homunculus techniques throughout Commorragh, while establishing new possibilities for the manipulation of flesh and consciousness. Rakarth's origins stretch back to the early centuries following the fall, when the proto-homunculi were still developing the techniques that would allow them to survive and thrive in their new environment within the Webway. His natural aptitude for biological manipulation quickly distinguished him from his contemporaries, while his willingness to experiment on himself provided insights that would have been impossible to achieve through the study of other subjects alone. The knowledge gained through these early self-modifications formed the foundation for techniques that would later be adopted throughout the homunculus community. The laboratories maintained by Urian Rakarth represent the pinnacle of homunculus scientific achievement, incorporating organic architecture and living equipment that respond to his thoughts and intentions, while providing capabilities that exceed those of conventional research facilities. The specimens contained within these facilities include examples of virtually every known form of life in the galaxy, along with numerous creatures that exist nowhere else due to his genetic manipulations and surgical modifications. The knowledge accumulated through millennia of experimentation has made him the foremost authority on biological manipulation within Drukhari society. The resurrection services provided by Rakarth command premium prices due to his unparalleled success rates and his ability to restore clients to conditions that exceed their original capabilities. His techniques for preserving and transferring consciousness have achieved such sophistication that the individuals he resurrects are often indistinguishable from their original selves, retaining all memories and personality traits while benefiting from physical enhancements that improve their capabilities. The waiting lists for his services include some of the most powerful figures in Commorragh, testament to the value placed on his unique abilities. The personal modifications that Rakarth has performed on himself over the millennia have transformed him into a being that bears little resemblance to his original form, incorporating organs and limbs from dozens of different species, while maintaining the consciousness and memories that define his identity. His current appearance defies easy description, combining elements that seem to shift and change based on his immediate needs, while maintaining an overall configuration that suggests both great age and terrible power. The surgical precision required to achieve such extensive modifications while preserving functionality demonstrates skills that border on the supernatural. The influence that these legendary figures exercise over Drukhari society extends far beyond their individual achievements to encompass the shaping of cultural values and social structures that define their civilization's character. Their examples provide models for behavior and achievement that inspire others to pursue their own paths toward excellence while establishing standards that maintain the competitive dynamics essential to Drukhari society. The legends that have grown around their exploits serve both as entertainment and as educational tools that transmit important cultural knowledge to future generations. The legacy of these remarkable individuals continues to shape the development of Drukhari society as new generations of warriors, politicians, and scientists seek to emulate their achievements while developing their own approaches to the challenges that face their species. The knowledge and techniques that they have developed form the foundation for continued innovation and advancement that ensures the survival and prosperity of their civilization in a galaxy filled with enemies and opportunities. Their stories serve as reminders that even among a species defined by cruelty and predation, individual excellence and achievement can transcend the limitations that constrain lesser beings. The dark city of Commorragh stands as testament to the potential that can be achieved when intelligence, ruthlessness, and absolute dedication to survival combine in service of a civilization that has chosen to embrace its darkest nature rather than flee from it. The figures who have shaped its development represent the apex of what their species can achieve when freed from the moral constraints that limit other civilizations, creating a society that has survived for 10 millennia through the systematic exploitation of suffering, while developing technologies and capabilities that rival those of any power in the galaxy. Their continued existence serves as both warning and promise, a demonstration of the terrible prices that can be paid for survival and the remarkable heights that can be achieved by those willing to pay them.